Hello and welcome to 6 Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku had a nanotech manipulation quirk? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
A terrifying scream reverberates far below the surface of a remote laboratory in Japan. These screams abruptly turn into inhumane roars that transform into the fierce roars of a creature that is struggling for release with the sole purpose of destruction, as a sickly yellow glow emanates from the room where the scream originates. A tall, well-built man with long, black hair that flows past his shoulders and has tips as white as the lab coat he currently wears stands behind the thick layer of observation glass. The result has his dark brown eyes narrowed and his face contorted into a frown. One more failure. The sound of high heels clicking on the cold metal floor comes from behind him as he watches the abomination flail against the restraints. A sarcastic, feminine voice asks, "I assume we are still far from success, Cleto." The man, who is now identified as Cleto, turns to face the woman, fighting the urge to lash out in retaliation. "A simple setback, Akumu," he said with gritted teeth. "Minor calibrations to the programming of the nanites should yield far more positive results in the next subject." Naturally, this was a lie. The Nanite project was actually regressing because of one factor. The peculiarity factor. As it was, nanites and the Quirk gene were just not compatible, and if a human with a Quirk gene came into contact with nanites, the outcome was similar to the multi-eyed, multi-limbed, feral mutation that exists before them. Layers of skin dripping onto the floor and evaporating into mist demonstrated that these exponentially variegated organisms, or EVOs, were unstable, unhinged, and of no practical use to the organization. As it were, the pool of healthy, capable subjects who could yield positive results was getting smaller every day, since more than 80% of the present population had a quirk. Akumu merely grinned at the response, her dark purple fringe revealing an evil gleam in her eye, examining the object before her for a moment before making her way to the station, which housed the control center. She hovered her hand over the keyboard and said, "Is that so? Well, then, I have full faith that you will continue to work hard, Cleto." As she pressed the button, a dazzling light behind the glass began to shine for a few seconds before going out. "I have full faith that you will aid me in achieving my providence," she said. The flash of heat and light had wiped out all traces, and the mutated subject was no more. "Unless, of course, you wish to be next to be overloaded." Cleto, who had been silently observing the devastation of his most recent test subject, turned back to the woman, but this time he was not met with the sardonic grin. Rather, he saw a look of utter disgust and hatred, a look that vowed to fulfill the aforementioned threat. After what felt like hours, Cleto finally articulated his response after staring blankly into those vengeful, black eyes. "As you wish." Immediately turning on her heel, Akuma strode out of the lab to another area of the compound, the lab doors slamming behind her. Cleto's gaze lingered on a single word as he returned to his notes. Alpha. The Nanite program was declared to have begun. Providence. By Akuma's starting line. It was a nanite that gave its host the freedom to create nanites that could be programmed to obey any command. His research on said alpha nanite was still lacking because, even if he managed to modify the nanites to be more palatable to the human body, it was extremely unlikely that the vessel could control them. This would essentially create a ticking time bomb before the alpha's host exploded into yet another failure. But that was an issue for the Cleto of the future. The Cleto of the present had to figure out how to deal with the issue at hand. But the result was the same regardless of the calculations. No, he required a suitable vessel, a person who would not become a mindless abomination and could endure the process. An able-bodied, eccentric person. Cleto sighed, got to his feet, and left the laboratory. He was not improving, and a change of scenery might help him decompress. Another figure came from the other direction as he was moving through the lengthy, dimly lit hallways of the compound, and they stopped as they were about to pass, looking at one another. The man in front of Cleto had short, cropped gray hair on his head, and his green eyes stood out against his worn-out face. This man turned out to be Richard Shield, brother of David Shield, the famous former sidekick of All Might, the current #1 hero. Along with Cleto, Richard was the other key player in the Nanite program, spearheading the research. "Ah, Richard, perfect timing. I seem to have run into an impasse. Richard's reply interrupted him with a growl. "Can it, Cleto?" With a sigh, Cleto held up a hand to his temple. "Must we have this dialogue every time we encounter my old friend?" If we can work together to our maximum capacity, then I am certain that we will achieve a breakthrough. Why is it so difficult for you to accept that our research, our dream can now finally be realized? Our dream, Richard exclaimed in shock. The instant you chose to team up with that devil, our dream turned into a nightmare. Be cautious, Richard, Cleto cautioned. Or what? We're too valuable to kill and she knows it, Richard exploded. We're the only ones who can materialize the Nanite program. Correct, we are. However, with our current progress the program is going to go up in smoke and then there will be no use for either of us. Oh please, Richard grumbled. That psychopath would never give up the idea of her providence. The prospect of a weapon that powerful is far too attractive to risk throwing away. Cleto closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and looked down. His irritation with Richard's obstinacy was growing. He paused, then raised his head indifferently and posed a question to Richard. How is your research toward the Omega Nanite coming along? Richard tensed for a moment, then reluctantly answered sharply, something Cleto did not miss. No progress. It can successfully command foreign nanites. However, the risk of it being rendered non-functional if introduced to a large volume of nanites is still far too high. Coupled with the facts that are based on your research with the Alpha, it is unlikely to be compatible with a quirked individual. Based on my research, Richard my dear friend, if you just took the next step to human trials then I'm sure that. There was no room for debate when Richard stepped in and said, no. His eyes narrowed, no human experiments. I can handle using this organization to accomplish my goals, but I will not stoop to the levels that you have and create any more of those evos out of innocent people. Your goals? Cleto asked, raising an eyebrow, since his friend's language was always perfect. Richard never once backed down as he looked straight into Cleto's eyes. He said definitively, yes, my goals. Then he marched down the compound's dark hallway. A smirk appeared on Cleto's face as he watched as it vanished into the darkness. He muttered to himself, just what are you planning, Richard? And then continued in the other direction, going back to his initial strategy of mental purification. He would benefit from a visit to the city. Not a quirk. Izuku Midoriya had been cursed by this word for the past 10 years of his life. He was now 14 years old, and his fantasy of going to UA and becoming a hero grew more and more unrealistic. Katsuki, Kachan, Bakugo, his former best friend, was among the majority of people who developed their quirk at the age of 4. Since most of the 20% of people without a quirk were either older members of the previous generation or, well, Izuku, that was actually the case for almost the whole population. He could, however, hold out hope that the quirk would emerge over the course of the following 4 years. False, as Bakugo was reminding him so politely at the moment. With a savage smile slowly spreading across his face, Bakugo growled, damn it Deku, how many times I gotta remind ya huh? And held out his palm to the boy who was cowering in the fetal position on the alleyway floor. As he used his explosion quirk, sparks burst on his palm. This time, he would make sure he received the message. Bang! Izuku whimpered in agony as a tiny explosion erupted and engulfed him. Even though Katsuki was a vicious man, his deft use of his quirk was definitely elite, and the explosion he unleashed only slightly burned Izuku and not enough to do any serious or long-lasting harm. But that didn't mean it wasn't extremely painful. Bakugo leaned in close and asked, when are ya gonna get it through that skull of yours? A quirkless nobody like you ain't ever gonna become a hero. Bakugo kicked Izuku hard in the ribs and then backed off towards the 2 lackeys behind him. With his head still pointing down, Izuku stood up defiantly and spluttered out a response, coughing from the soot mixture and the bruises that were forming on his ribcage. He stumbled, why cough, you don't know that Kachan? Izuku remains unfazed despite his old friend destroying his notebooks and physically abusing him. It was evident as he raised his head. There was still a gleam in his eyes. I may not have a quirk but I. Bakugo turned back with a look of pure contempt, interrupting his valiant speech. With a growl of rage, he seized Izuku by the shirt collar and slammed him against a wall. The courage Izuku had previously evoked swiftly vanished as his crimson eyes narrowed dangerously. Bakugo frowned and his anger was clearly visible as he said, for the last time shithead, it's impossible for a useless, quirkless, Deku like you to become a hero, even a small fry villain would throw you to the side like the pebble you are. His voice was getting louder as he spoke, saying, but since ya wanna die so bad, let me give you a preview of what a villain is gonna do to your quirkless, worthless ass. At the end of his tirade, he was practically screaming, his right palm glowing and crackling with nitroglycerin that was desperate to ignite and explode again. A third voice interrupted, asking, "Did I hear the word quirkless?" An imposing man in a white lab coat stood at the alley's entrance, and all four boys turned to face him. As the man strode toward them, Bakugo's anger subsided a little, but he managed to keep Izuku pinned and watched the man suspiciously before growling at the stranger. "Back off and mind ya business, old-timer. I'm teaching this nerd a lesson on what happens when an extra steps out of line." Without hesitation, the man approached, a peculiar look on his face. Was it joy? In any case, as Izuku writhed in Bakugo's hold, fear was visible in his eyes, which were now fixed on him with an almost predatory gleam. "Oh no, please, by all means, don't mind me. I'm sure this conversation is extremely educational. I would just like to confirm that this boy you are currently holding is quirkless." Bakugo yelled at the man. "Yeah, he is. What's it matter to you, huh?" The man stood looking at the scene in front of him, pausing to absorb the realization. "Fascinating," was his exhale. Bakugo gave the man a crazy look and exclaimed, "Huh, you got a screw loose or something, old-timer?" No, once again, pay me no mind, I shall be on my way, you are free to continue." The man walked past the four boys and disappeared through the other end of the alleyway. Following this odd and fleeting encounter, Bakugo threw Izuku roughly to the ground. After saying his final words, Bakugo left the alleyway in the direction the man had entered, followed by his two smiling lackeys. "Whatever," he sneered, "I'm outta here. I got better things to do than waste my time beating sense into you, Deku. Just remember to stay out of my way." After taking a few moments to gather his thoughts, Izuku got up and brushed himself off before limping slowly out of the alleyway in the same direction as Bakugo. He was not aware that there were eyes watching him from around the corner and back down the alleyway, observing everything he did. Cleto was unable to hide the smile that was plastered on his face. His mind had been successfully cleared by this trip into the city. No, even more so, it had given him the answer to his issue. There was already a plan in place. Wait until the child has stopped moving. Present the appropriate reinforcements. Take his test subject. A successful strategy to help him achieve his objectives. Everything depended on a helpless, naive, and eccentric child. He opened his phone and hurriedly dialed the compound's number. "It's Maya Send Agansa, I've found a breakthrough." Izuku shouted through his apartment, "Mom, I'm home," as he dropped his bag to announce his return from school. At the moment, his mother was in the kitchen making dinner. When Inko Midoriya saw her son's condition, she lost control of her temper. "Good to hear, dear. How was your day?" "Did yo oh my goodness, Izuku, what happened to your face? Your clothes as well." Inko's uniform was slightly smudged around the edges, and her son's face and hands had minor scratches and bruises, while his left eye showed signs of swelling. He scratched his head and laughed uneasily as he said, Oh, nothing, Mom, just a bit of roughhousing at school, nothing major." Inko gazed at her son doubtfully. She was aware. She was always aware. She had known her son's condition would cause him to struggle in life since the day they had returned from the doctor's office 10 years earlier. She was aware of how vicious kids could be. Additionally, she was aware that her son would even conceal broken bones in order to spare her anxiety. All of this, of course, caused her worries to multiply tenfold. But for the moment, not wanting to provoke a fight by encroaching further, she merely sighed and changed the subject. "Go get yourself cleaned up, Izuku. Katsudon will be ready in 10 minutes, you can tell me about your day over dinner." Izuku yelled, "Okay, Mom," as he hurried to his room to finish getting ready for dinner and winding down for the day. When his room's door closed, Inko cast a sorrowful glance at the ground. Why was she unable to fulfill her role as a mother and shield her child from the harsh realities of the outside world? Why was it necessary for a soul as pure as Izuku's to go through such suffering? What prevented her from giving birth to him with a peculiarity? But before her mind could sink any lower, someone knocked on the door. Odd, she didn't have anyone in mind. After wiping away the single tear that had fallen down her cheek, Inko walked over to the door, feeling uneasy as she reached for the handle. Her body seemed to be yelling at her to keep the door closed. She went against her instincts, and before she could even say hello to whoever it was, 3 clicks reverberated through the corridor, and her mouth felt warm. Inko tried to scream and warn her son as she stared in disbelief at the masked man brandishing a silenced pistol, but her words were insufficient because she was in shock from the gunshot wounds to her chest and fell backwards, crashing onto the ground. As her vision deteriorated, she glanced up and saw 3 men standing in their apartment doorway. "Mom." Izuku left his room and entered the hallway, where he saw his mother lying on the floor with blood dripping from her chest and leaving stains on the carpet. Inko could only whimper. Noah, before the first of the 3 men standing in the doorway, the one with the smoking pistol still in his hand, entered and gave her a final blow to the forehead, instantly killing her eyes. Izuku, unable to process what he was seeing, and acting instinctively, rushed forward, screaming incoherently, but before he could reach out to grab his mother, the second man grabbed him by the back of the neck and quickly gave him a tranquilizing injection in the spine. The last man in the doorway, dressed in a white lab coat, was the last thing Izuku saw before his vision went swimming and he blacked out. The 2 masked men nodded silently, the second passing Izuku's unconscious body to Cleto while the first took a bottle of kerosene from his jacket. "Marvelous work, gentlemen," Cleto said to the masked agents, applauding slowly. "I trust that I can leave the cleanup to you while I transport our wonderful subject here back to the compound." "Ah yes, the old tried and tested, accidental fire method, I must say, not the most creative, but effective nonetheless," said Cleto. If the 2 agents heard his remark, they did not acknowledge it and continued to pour fuel throughout the apartment without recording a reaction. Cleto smiled at the agent's almost robotic demeanor and just walked out the door with Izuku in tow, heading for a black SUV with tinted windows that was parked downstairs. He threw Izuku into the back without any ceremony, making sure he wouldn't wake until they were safely at the compound with the contents of the tranquilizer. Cleto saw a head of spiky blonde hair at the end of the road as he slammed the back door shut and made his way to the driver's seat. His eyes met those of the boy who had earlier threatened Izuku. He smirked and waved to the boy before getting into the car and driving away. He laughed as he started to head back to the compound after seeing the child's bewildered look. When he eventually awoke from his sleep, his mind was racing. He was confined in a dimly lit cell, and the first thing he saw were the cold, sterile tiles that lined the roof. Izuku Midoriya's last memory was of his mother's dead eyes as blood dripped from her head and body. His head and torso soared upward. Now completely awake, his system was shocked by the traumatic memories, which woke him up. But he didn't get very far because he saw that, for added security, heavy leather straps with metal chains wrapped tightly around both his arms and legs held him securely to the bed in which he lay. "Ah, you're awake, marvelous." Izuku looked in the direction of the voice and saw the man in the white lab coat grinning triumphantly on the other side of a small window that was framed by thick steel bars. As Izuku attempted to respond, the sickening feeling of bile rose and spilled out, causing the words to become stuck in his throat. "Oh, dear me, quite a mess you're making there, child. I suppose that is one of the side effects of the tranquilizer you were administered. Nevertheless, my boy, you don't have to speak just yet. All you have to do is listen, as you are to become the next stage of human evolution, a scientific revolution, so to speak, as today you." Cut to the chase. Cleto interrupted his digression with a different, rough voice. Izuku's gaze shifted to the man beside the one who was identified as Cleto. With his short gray hair and his stone-faced, almost tired expression, he appeared older. The hoarseness in his throat still prevented Izuku from speaking, but he could see a flicker of pity in the man's eyes through the bars of the cell. "As I was explaining before I was so rudely interrupted," Cleto said, clearing his throat and glaring at the man across from him to emphasize the final 2 words. "You Izuku Midoriya have been chosen due to your specific condition, to spearhead our revolutionary program known as the Nanite Program. I am confident, no, I am certain that you will succeed in achieving the dawn of providence." Izuku had a spinning head. A revolution, the Nanite Program, Providence. What was happening? Izuku Midoriya, the boy who aspired to be a hero, was just a quirkless person. The boy who was unable to keep his mother safe. He spluttered out, "Where am I? Where is my mom?" The final question was met with a flood of tears as he dreaded the response. He hoped that everything was a sick, twisted nightmare. To address your first question, you are currently at the compound. A tour of the premises will follow shortly as we get you acquainted with the new regime. Regarding your mother, well, my boy, you see, she was simply a disposable variable in the equation and no need to concern yourself over such trivial matters. However, this is all about you and what you can become, the limitless potential that you possess and how you can be so much greater than every individual currently on this planet. "Why?" was the only word Izuku uttered while lowering his head, his emotions overtaking him and making it impossible for him to form a coherent sentence. Cleto said, Did you say something?" Izuku's head jerked up, his eyes filled with pain and an unusual rage. Izuku screamed, "Why did you kill my mom?" The pain was tearing him apart, and he would have undoubtedly gone into shock if it weren't for his rage at the man who had taken away the only woman he loved. His breathing became labored as Richard scowled and looked off to the side, his eyes unable to meet Izuku's, while Cleto just stared at him blankly. "As I stated, she was a disposable variable in the..." Izuku was furious and said, "I don't give a shit about your equations." When he swore for the first time in his 14 years of life, he was utterly devastated. "Why did you take her from me?" Cleto chirped. "Must everyone interrupt me?" Richard, who was standing beside him, growled at this. He left the room that was used as Izuku's observation room without saying anything because he could take it no more. With a curious expression on his face, Cleto looked in the direction that Richard had left, but his thoughts were interrupted by an Izuku threat delivered in a dangerously low voice. "I'll make you pay for this. I promise. You won't get away with this." Cleto turned again at this point. "Oh. Well, I hope that you can put those words into action. If my plans are successful, you won't just be able to get revenge on me, Izuku, but on the entire world and this society for all of the wrongs that they have delivered to you. In fact, these emotions that you display may be good. The drive of your will may even improve your chances of success and carry you through the process, although I may need to adjust my calculations due to the intensity of the emotions displayed. It should be nothing more than minor tweaks," Cleto retort. Izuku, meanwhile, just stared in shock. In reality, this man saw him as nothing more than a prop for whatever gory experiment he had in store. He babbled, showing no mercy, no pity for him. His mother, whose life he had stolen, would not be spared. How could someone be so cruel and perverse? Furthermore, only a general explanation had been given up until this point, so the specifics of such an experiment had not even been explained. The mind was racing. Which Nanite program was he referring to? What did success and failure mean? What would the results of such an experiment show? In the future, would Izuku ever be able to leave and live something approaching a normal life? Where had the heroes gone? Well, that's enough brainstorming for one day. I suppose that it's time for you to go night-night once more while I discuss how we shall proceed with my wonderful colleague whom so graciously exited, Cleto said, interrupting Izuku's thoughts by stepping out of his mad scientist tirade and giving him his full attention. When Izuku heard this, the doors to the observation room opened again, and then the doors to his cell opened and a man in a mask entered again, holding a syringe. When Izuku realized he was going to be tranquilized again, his eyes widened. He still had a lot of unanswered questions regarding his fate. Izuku writhed helplessly against the restraints as the masked agent pinned him down and gave him the tranquilizer at the base of his neck. Wait, you still haven't explained anything that's going on," Izuku said. He could hardly hear Cleto's last words as he succumbed to the well-known feeling of blacking out. "Not to worry, in all due time, all shall be clear, Izuku. Next time you wake, Providence will be realized." After giving the unconscious Izuku one final glance, Cleto turned around and hurried out of the cell to find Richard. He started down the hallway and stopped outside Richard's assigned room in the compound. To let Richard know he was outside, he pressed a button on the touchpad beside the heavy metal doors, and the doors slid open almost immediately. Cleto approached Richard, who was sitting at his desk with his head deep in his research notes. Without even looking at Cleto, Richard's weary voice could be heard. "Seriously, Cleto, a child, what does it matter? Age has never been an issue with any of my prior test subjects," he said, recalling the unborn children who were a part of the experiments to see if the nanites could be used before the Quirk gene fully activated. The experiment's outcome demonstrated that exposure to nanites would result in a mutation that evolved into an Evo as long as a Quirk gene was present from birth. Richard shook his head, still not looking up, at Cleto's casual remarks and his total disregard for any moral boundaries in connection with his experiments. Richard was blunt when he said, "Regardless, he is not suitable." A bewildered Cleto asked, "What do you mean he is not suitable?" "He is quirkless, young, and malleable." Izuku was as near to the ideal specimen as they could find, as far as he knew. Richard answered, "I mean he is not fully prepared for the process of becoming Providence at this moment in time," before letting out a long sigh and eventually raising his head to meet Cleto's. Cleto raised an eyebrow in response, asking him to elaborate. While yes, in theory being a quirkless individual will almost guarantee success, upon further inspection, his body is still far too fragile, scrawny and unfit. "No, this will not do. Further coupled with the mental trauma that you inflicted upon him during the process of his capture, it is highly likely that he is completely unfit in that regard as well. It presents a degree of risk that I am not comfortable accepting. We cannot risk the host of the Alpha Omega Nanite having these deficiencies, Cleto. Not only would it be a danger to us all, but it would be a waste of all our hard work. He must be a programmable and competent specimen immediately, and in order to absolutely maximize the chances of that happening, Izuku will require a degree off a training of before undergoing the process, Richard clarified. Cleto was frowning because he could not understand why Richard was now so hesitant, even though they were about to finish their role in the Nanite program. A recalibration post-process would surely suffice in addressing any mental instabilities that may occur. Furthermore, Akumu has contingency training plans in place once he has fully assimilated both Alpha and Omega nanites, to ensure he becomes the ultimate weapon that she dreams of. This is not our responsibility. Our task was to complete the research and find a suitable specimen. Nothing more, nothing less. Are you really that comfortable with trusting the last 5 years of our dedicated work entirely to that woman? She couldn't differentiate a nanite from a red blood cell, and you would trust her plans over my words. The man who invented these blasted machines in the first place. No, this is not up for debate, Cleto. While your barbaric methods of recalibration may work for the Alpha, the Omega is far more delicate. Izuku requires further preparation both physically and mentally before I can be certain that he will be able to utilize the Omega to the fullest capabilities. I will handle this preparation single-handedly by myself if I must, but I will not risk any form of failure. I need as close to 100% certainty of success as I can achieve. And he was getting louder, and he began to sweat afterward, the conviction that he spoke. Cleto's suspicion increased, and his eyes narrowed. There was a problem. Why did Richard suddenly become so opposed to moving on to the next phase? Had they not been working on this for the previous 5 years? Cleto, clearly frustrated by Richard's stubbornness and possible secrecy, gritted his teeth and asked, I thought your progress on the Omega had stalled. How can you be so confident that it will handle a large volume of nanites once the boy has been prepared to your standards? Wouldn't it be more effective to simply start the process and recalibrate if there are any difficulties? Before answering, Richard fixed him with his unwavering gaze once more. We both know that there is a link between nanite tolerance and physical and mental capacity. It is the sole reason why an older quirkless specimen was not chosen. Providence is meant to be the perfect weapon, Cleto. There should be no further recalibration necessary once it has been realized. Once again, I want to ensure to the best of my abilities that this succeeds. The sooner it does, the sooner I can wash my hands of this damn project and never step foot in this accursed building ever again. Cleto reluctantly gave in after the two glared at one another. He was unable to dispute that Richard was the only person with knowledge of the inner workings of the Omega Nanite. He worked in this field. Even though he continued to suspect Richard of having hidden agendas, he was unwilling to investigate them just yet. Making sure Izuku's body would adjust to the nanites as intended and that he could absorb both Alpha and Omega nanites was now the top priority. Fine, do as you please and prepare the boy. But you will be the one to explain to Akumu why there is a further delay despite us acquiring a prime specimen. Richard laughed. Fine by me. Let me know when he wakes up so that I can get started. Cleto nodded curtly, turned away, and left the room. Izuku wouldn't wake up for another 24 hours. Bakugo was unable to get rid of his unease as he made his way home. That guy he had seen was the same old jerk he had met in the alleyway when he was reprimanding Deku. Why, then, was he now outside Deku's home? What was he cramming into his vehicle's rear end? Boom! Bakugo was startled out of his reverie by a loud explosion behind him. His eyes grew wide as he turned to look behind him and saw a fast-rising fire coming from an apartment building. In particular, the apartment building where Deku resided. His body had turned and he was running toward the building before he could comprehend what had happened. Bakugo stopped in front and watched in horror and shock as the third-floor apartment where Deku lived was consumed by flames. He looked around the slowly expanding crowd, hoping to catch a glimpse of Deku or Inko's green hair as people hurried out of the building with their kids and loved ones. He was unable to see them, so he hastily took his phone out of his pocket and dialed 911. It's true that Deku's irrational thinking and constant look-down on him annoyed him, but he refused to do nothing but watch him perish in this fire. His concerns increased rapidly as the seconds passed because he could still not see his mother or son. It seemed like an hour passed before he heard sirens wailing and pro-heroes shouting for civilians to disperse so they could start working. Bakugo hurried to tell him about the two people he was currently concerned about after spotting the pro-hero, Backdraft, currently putting out the flames as best he could. Backdraft yelled, "Get back now, kid. It's not safe," as he saw Bakugo coming. Bakugo ignored him, keeping going until he was standing next to the hero and yelling at him. "You're a damn hero, ain't ya? Go save em," he said, pointing to the apartment in Midoriya that was now the scene of the most intense flames. "There's probably two people that are stuck in that unit. A woman and her son." Although Backdraft was somewhat surprised by the boy's bravado, he understood the stress he was probably under at the time and knew he needed to calm him down. However, his top priority was to get as many people out of the danger zone as possible. "I'll do my best, but I need you to get Ba." Debris began to fall toward the crowd almost in slow motion as a gas pipe was touched by the flames, causing an explosion to erupt from the building's side and cut off Backdraft. A gust of wind came from behind, removing the debris in midair just as it appeared that there would be more casualties. "Have no fear, citizens. FWOOSH. Before many could realize it, the number one pro-hero himself was standing there as another tremendous gust of wind blew past the entire crowd, nearly putting out the flames on his own. "For I am here." All Might turned to Bakugo and Backdraft, his signature smile firmly fixed on his face. "Your concern is appreciated, young man, but I'm going to have to ask you to listen to the heroes and get back away from the danger. Don't worry, I'll have those whom you are concerned about out in a flash." With a thumbs up following this guarantee and another wind gust from his cruel speed, All Might disappeared from sight, most likely into the center of the now charred apartment building. All Might returned in 10 seconds, his smile gone and replaced with a grimace. "The unit you directed me to, I regret to inform you that there are no survivors in the area. There was also only one person present in the apartment to my knowledge." All Might did not want to reveal the specifics of the woman's charred corpse he had found, or the possibility that the other body that of a Childa may have been burned unnoticed. Bakugo's emotional outburst made the number one hero feel 10 times more guilty. "The fuck do you mean you couldn't save them? You're All Might. You save everyone. Deku would have been there as well. The fuck do you mean there was only one person?" In an attempt to appease Bakugo, All Might put a hand on his shoulder and spoke softly. But he was aware that he couldn't. This young man had been let down by him. A nearly unprecedented event for the number one hero. "Young Mana, I'm very sorry for your loss. Allow me to walk you home." With tears threatening to spill from the corner of his eyes, Bakugo shrugged his hand away. "Get the fuck off me, All Might. I don't need your help." He then bounded off, leaving All Might to watch him go before turning back to the authorities and heroes to help with any cleanup that might be required. On that day, Katsuki Bakugo made a vow that he would save everyone he came across as a hero. Every time, he would prevail. His victories would always be perfect. After a week had passed since the untimely deaths of Inko and Izuku Midoriya, and the Bakugo family was currently returning from the grave site in the car with a somber atmosphere looming over the three of them. The death of both in the fire had been officially confirmed. Even though Izuku's body was missing, it was believed that the explosions and flames had totally destroyed it. Over the past week, Katsuki had become more and more withdrawn, spending all of his time alone, either training in his room or going for long walks. After they got home, Masaru, Katsuki's father, made the decision to speak up in an attempt to defuse the situation. "Well, how about we all change and go out for some dinner tonight? I heard a nice new restaurant opened up next to the mall." Katsuki responded, "Who do ya take me for? Think I got time for that shit? I got a train," as he began to ascend the stairs to his room. Mitsuki chastised her son, "Oi brat, don't speak to your father like that." But all she received in return was a scoff. With a raised hand, "Mitsuki," Masaru said, "it's fine." As he started to storm past his parents and leave the house, Katsuki responded, "Fuck this shit, I'm going for another walk." As she watched her son leave, Mitsuki said, language brata, but her voice was a little flat this time. "And make sure you're home for dinner." "Whatever." Katsuki slammed the front door and mumbled. Mitsuki sighed as she gazed at the door, her worries for her son intensifying. "What are we gonna do with him, Masaru?" she asked. Masaru stood beside her and put an arm around her shoulder, saying, "Give him time, Mitsuki. He needs it, and we all do." Bakugo was passing Dagoba Municipal Beach when he noticed a gaunt blonde man standing on an electric scooter and a blonde girl of his age jogging in a turquoise tracksuit. Inquisitive, he paused and gazed as they stopped, then proceeded to a small trash pile and observed her gradually beginning to try to clear the mountains of trash that ruined the beach's appearance. Bakugo frowned and started to plod away again. What strange people! He heard the scrawny old man exclaim, this beach isn't going to clean itself. Come on Melissa, put your back into it. Yes sir, was the girl's enthusiastic response. She was now called Melissa. Bakugo saw that the trash was getting denser as he kept walking along the waterfront. Was that one little girl going to clean it by herself? What a farce. She had a delusion, just as deluded as. Bakugo stepped onto the beach, growling with rage. He had to release some tension. He lifted his left palm in the direction of a small pile of trash, then positioned his right hand in a circle in front of it to condense the explosion he was now charging. Bakugo inhaled deeply before launching a vicious assault. Bakugo called out the name of his special move, AP Shot. As a condensed beam of heat burst forth, piercing a hole through the trash and burning a large chunk of the mound. Bakugo turned to face the voice behind him, confronting the elderly man he had seen with the girl. You know, young man, unsolicited quirk use in public is a very serious offense. He paused to study the man's features, noting how sickly he appeared, nearly skin and bone, with his sunken eyes shading his face. But in the shadow, Bakugo could make out the man's sharp blue eyes, which exuded an indisputable presence. Instead of answering, Bakugo merely arched an eyebrow at the man before averting his gaze and returning his attention to the smoldering hole in the mound. But the man's expression changed from grave to a faint smile. However, I can't help but marvel at your skill and control over such a powerful quirk, and at such a young age no less. Tell me, young man, do you plan to become a hero one day? Asked the individual. No. The man was caught off guard by this response, and Bakugo turned to face him with a burning conviction in his eyes. I don't plan to become just a hero. I'm gonna be the greatest hero ever. I'm getting into UA in 4 years, and I'm gonna surpass even All Might. The man's smile changed to a broad, sincere grin at this statement. A noble and exceptional goal, young man. I wish you nothing but good luck and hope you are successful, although you might want to dial it back on using your quirk in public. Bakugo's response made the man laugh. I don't need luck, old timer, I've got skill. The man left after saying, yes, I guess you do. Well, I have to check in on my student, but I bid you farewell. Try to behave, young man. After the man had vanished from view, Bakugo muttered under his breath, don't tell me what to do. After 3 months, Bakugo was sitting in the back of his middle school class, staring out the window without paying any attention. What a jerk Aldera was. He was only thinking about UA at the moment, but he knew he was currently prepared for any challenges they might present, so all he could do was keep training and getting ready. We have a new student starting this term, class. Please make her feel welcome. Bakugo was unconcerned by the teacher's announcement because, to him, nothing that happened during the next 4 years at this school mattered, that is, until the new student entered the room and took the front seat. With assurance, she said, hello everyone, my name is Melissa Shield, and I hope we can all get along. Bakugo heard Tsubasa whistle and mutter something like, total hottie, under his breath to his right. He turned to face the newcomer and instantly recognized her as the girl he had seen cleaning the beach a month prior, which reminded him that he had passed there for the first time since that day and that the majority of the trash had been moved. There was no way this girl actually did it alone, right? Bakugo took a moment to examine her as she stood at the front. His eyes narrowed, and he could see that she had undergone physical training because she had a fair amount of lean muscle and a confident stance. After a minute or so, she turned to Bakugo and smiled before introducing herself again. Thank you, Melissa, the teacher said, indicating the vacant seat to Bakugo's left. Please take a seat next to Bakugo over there. Melissa nodded before going over, sitting down, and taking out her notebook, Bakugo looking at her thoughtfully the entire time. Nice to meet you. My name's Melissa, Bakugo interrupted her angrily, heard ya the first time, then averted his gaze and went back to his thoughts. Oh, right, of course. See, until the bell for class ended, the two stood silent and never spoke to one another. Bakugo stayed seated as the class dispersed because he had a task to complete. We're considering hitting you down at the arcade, Bakugo. From the doorway of the classroom, Tsubasa called out to him. Bakugo gave him a curt, piss off, extra, without even giving him a second look. Before running out of the classroom, Tsubasa stumbled out, alright, well see ya around, man. Bakugo got up, slammed his hand on Melissa's desk, and turned to face her, who was still packing away her belongings at her desk. "Oi, you." "Yes, Bakugo. What appears to be wrong?" Melissa said courteously from her chair. "Stop the nonsense. I recall you. You were out there using that old scarecrow to clean the beach. Are you attempting to be heroic or something?" Bakugo scowled at her while posing the queries. "Indeed, in actuality, I am. After high school, I intend to take the UA exam." "I take it that you're working toward the same objective?" Melissa inquired, unfazed by Bakugo's appearance. Bakugo sneered, "Blondie, our objectives aren't the same. I will be the number one. So, be careful not to get in my way," he said. "You say you want to be number one. Well then, you're wrong, because our goals are exactly the same," Melissa said, maintaining firm conviction while making direct eye contact with Bakugo. Bakugo arched an eyebrow, a little impressed by her fire. He had witnessed that drive before. "What is your peculiarity, huh?" Bakugo narrowed his eyes as Melissa averted her gaze, seemingly concealing something. "It's a peculiarity of stockpiles. Theoretically, it should give me superpowers." "What? In theory, what the devil do you mean?" Melissa spoke in a low voice and lowered her head almost ashamedly. "Until my body matures, it cannot withstand the backlash. I break my bones every time I try to use it. That's why I've been picking up trash on the beach. It's a way for me to train my body to be stronger than I am." Bakugo thought for a moment before answering. "So you're saying that you're essentially quirkless right now?" He raised an eyebrow again and asked. "Yes. However, I will not rest. I will continue to put in a lot of effort until I am able to control this power. Until I'm the greatest hero of all time." He knew exactly what it was that made Bakugo feel this way, and he was determined not to make the same mistakes again, especially since she shared his eyes. "Well then," he said with a smug grin, "what do you think we do for some actual training since we both have 4 years to kill?" Melissa gave him a startled look before responding with a self-assured smile. "You've got yourself a deal." Bakugo's smirk turned into a broad smile. "Blondie, be sure to keep going. Because I'm definitely not going to hold back." A day following capture, Izuku was once again greeted by the familiar sensation of the tranquilizer wearing off, his head swimming as he blinked in and out of consciousness, and the familiar sensation of the severe dehydration and the restraints holding him down reminded him of the hell he was currently experiencing. "You're finally awake." Izuku's gloomy thoughts were interrupted by a voice from inside the cell, and as he turned to face it, he recognized the man leaning against the wall as the one who had been standing beside Cleto when he first woke up. The man approached him, making Izuku wince, then he leaned down a little and removed the restraints from his left arm, setting a glass of water beside him. "Drink up," the man said, backing away and nodding at the glass. The man rolled his eyes at Izuku's skeptical glance at the glass. "It's only water. Believe me, you need to drink because you've been out for more than 24 hours. In addition," he said dryly, "I can't put anything else in there because you are far too valuable to everyone in this building." Thus, like everyone else here, this man also considered him merely a commodity. Izuku grabbed the glass of water and drank it all at once, spluttering and coughing a little as he did so. The man who came after him pulled a chair over and sat across from Izuku before speaking to him. "I understand that you're confused. Let me give you the rundown because I'm sure Cleto's digression did nothing to clarify what the hell is happening here." As he spoke, the man's eyes were fixed on Izuku. He pointed to the cell's roof and said, "My name is Richard Shield, and this building is known as the Compound, the base of the organization that wants to make the Nanite Program a reality. The goal of the Nanite Program is to integrate these tiny micro-machines, known as nanites, into the human body. Since they can be programmed to enable the human body to accomplish nearly anything, these nanoparticles theoretically have boundless potential. Additionally, the Alpha and Omega command nanites will be implanted into your body by the organization. The Omega would enable you to command these nanites for any purpose that you, and consequently the organization, deem appropriate, while the Alpha would enable you to continuously produce an endless supply of nanites. Providence would become your ultimate weapon as a result." Astounded, Izuku merely questioned, "But why me?" "As you can see, there is a significant problem with the nanites. They cannot coexist with the Quirk gene. When they come into contact with a person who has a Quirk gene, the result is a severe and feral mutation that lasts until the nanites overwhelm the body's cells and the person dies in a particularly gory way. EVOs stands for exponentially variegated organisms, which is the term we use to describe these mutated individuals. You are the ideal subject because you are among the last fit, able-bodied, eccentric people in our society. Izuku let out a deep sigh at the irony of his curse. It was an amazing amount of important information to process. His quirkiness had been the source of his social disdain for years, and now it was something that a group of people wanted, but for all the wrong reasons. Richard went on, however, they are under the impression that you are currently not prepared for such a procedure and that a large volume of nanites will result in a failure, so I volunteered to train you. Izuku took the pause in the conversation as an opportunity to speak, and he stiffened at the thought of the terrible training methods this vicious organization might have planned for him. As a child, all I ever wanted to be was a hero, but I was unable to do so because I was born without any quirks. Now you're telling me that because of my quirks, I will have to become a mindless tool, a slave to evil people. As he attempted to maintain some semblance of composure in the face of such a dire circumstance, tears threatened to spill out of his eyes once more. If the procedure is successful, then yes, that will be the outcome, Richard's grim admission stated. Just his Deku luck, the would-be hero, turned into a monster, and Izuku choked out a sob before breaking down in tears. Why don't we throw a wrench into the situation? Izuku's head snapped up at Richard's question, tears still running down his cheeks as he examined the man's solemn face for signs of dishonesty or unreliability but found none. I cannot in good conscience allow my machines, my work, to be used for those purposes, Richard went on, his tone changing to one of pure conviction. The leader of this organization, Akumu, has her own revolution, so to speak, planned out, with you as the spearhead, he said. When I first created the nanites, I intended to use them to help people who couldn't help themselves and to rid the world of illness. But this was upset by the quirk gene incompatibility, and before I knew it, the organization had taken over my research and persuaded my partner Cleto to support their cause. I never meant for there to be so much cruelty, and I will always feel guilty until the day I die. So why work for them? Izuku asked, looking at the man bewildered. With a sigh, Richard looked down and said, I blame my own gullibility. Initially, I received guarantees that they would fully support my research. I couldn't turn down the opportunity at the time because the organization had the resources of finance, technology, and facilities to make the Nanite program a reality. But you Izuku Midoriya, you have the heart and soul to bring about what I intended for the nanites, Richard said, turning to face Izuku with blazing eyes. Therefore, even if it means my life, I will make a promise to you if you can find it in your heart to trust me for the upcoming week, kid. You'll leave this place, you'll turn into a hero. Izuku swallowed, praying it wouldn't come to that, and asked Richard, what are your plans? Despite my stalling for time, in 3 days they will start to gradually inject you with small doses of nanites to see how your body acclimates. If all goes well and you don't completely mutate, then they plan to move on with the full procedure by the end of the week, Richard said, clearly pleased that Izuku didn't flatly reject his offer. I'm confident you'll be alright if you can make it through the first dose. On your second dosage, I will personally give you the Omega in private. You will be able to control the nanites that are already inside your body as well as any that are absorbed into it in the future once you have the Omega. Wait, didn't you warn them that giving me the Omega nanites so quickly was too dangerous? That a lot of nanites could possibly lead to a failure in my current condition? Izuku inquired anxiously. The Omega has been programmed with a self-preservation feature, Richard explained. Yes, but that is only in an extreme case with an excessive quantity that they would never even consider administering, Richard explained. Even I have no idea how it will respond in that particular situation, but one thing is certain. It won't let you pass away. Izuku was stuck between a rock and a hard place, so it seemed obvious that he would have nanites in his body. The question was whether he would control them or allow someone else to do so. He said, let's do it, Richard, with conviction. Well, said Richard, nodding with satisfaction, if you're so ready, we better get started right away. Oh okay, was Izuku's confident response, even though this caused him to retreat. Richard then released all of his restraints, enabling Izuku to get off the bed completely. Izuku felt weak and dizzy as he got to his feet, stumbling before he was able to get back on his feet. Follow me, Richard said, gesturing to Izuku, and the two of them left the cell. As they passed through the hallway, a figure came up and the woman in charge of everything, Akumu, appeared. Izuku could practically feel the evil emanating from her as she smirked and looked down at him. Richard, I assume this is my providence. This is Izuku Midoriya. Yes, I am currently taking him to his introductory physical training session. Then she knelt down and touched his head, making Izuku shudder, but he said nothing. I have great expectations for you, my Providence. Her lone visible eye gazed straight into his heart. Do not disappoint me. She then straightened up and strode down the corridors into the depths of the compound without giving them a second look. Izuku remained motionless until Richard pushed him once more. Ignore her, we have work to do, kid. All right. After walking a short distance, the two came to a set of large metal doors, which opened when Richard punched in a key code on the unit next to them. Inside, a number of scientists in lab coats were looking into another room through observation glass. Izuku was unable to see what was behind the observation glass before a shrieking sound and a wave of light burst forth. Everyone, Richard said, drawing everyone's attention to Izuku and him. This is Izuku Midoriya, the subject who will host the Alpha Omega Nanite, he said. You have been informed that he will be performing a physical examination today. We will start soon, so please get the topic ready. Trust me, kid, Richard said, lowering himself to eye level with Izuku. Before guiding Izuku into the room, he whispered to him, and don't die. The doors slammed shut, and a small hatch at the other end of the room opened, and he heard something growl as it came out. Izuku watched in disbelief as a dog-like creature with 3 tails, red fur, and no eyes appeared. It had a thick metal collar around its neck with a red light flashing on it, and a long tongue that protruded from its lipless mouth as its razor-sharp teeth dripped with saliva. Izuku took a step back in sheer terror as the creature strode toward him, its long claws dragging against the ground. Izuku kept backing up until his back struck the wall, and he froze in terror. The creature, seemingly sensing his helplessness, seized the chance to lunge at him, and Izuku instinctively sprang to the side as the claws, swipe just missed and the creature crashed into the wall. The creature turned and swung toward Izuku again without hesitation, so he closed his eyes and lashed out and kicked forward, his foot making a solid contact with the side of its head. The creature made a little whimpering sound and backed off a little, now cautious that the prey it had hunted might fight back, and chose to circle Izuku before lunging at him one last time. This time, though, Izuku was too exhausted and afraid to fend off an attack, and he was left numb as the claws were inches from his face. As he was about to be severely mauled, he heard a high-pitched shriek and opened his eyes to see the metal collar on the ground between his legs, but the creature was nowhere to be seen, and the light on the collar stopped flashing red and turned green as a wave of heat and light engulfed him and the creature. Izuku gasped and turned in horror as he heard doors open, only to see Richard standing in the doorway with a stern expression on his face. Richard took Izuku by the arm and dragged him out of the room, turning as he went to tell the scientists who were watching. I told you he wasn't ready, you see. Failure would have been the inescapable result of a child this weak and exhausted assimilating the Omega Nanite at this time. I'll start getting ready for him now that we have confirmation. What the devil was that? What just took place? Still in shock over what had happened, Izuku stammered out. Remember how I told you that an Evo's cells die when they are overloaded by nanites? Richard asked him grimly. Richard went on, that was an example of that. The collar was a fail-safe to protect you, after Izuku nodded. In essence, it accelerated the process and killed the Evo instantly by supercharging the nanites in its body. Izuku gave the picture a grimace, then looked down with despair and began to cry once more. I'm sorry for being so useless in there, it was just so savage and aggressive and I just froze. You told me not to die, but if it wasn't for the collar I would ha. Richard interrupted Izuku's digression with a loud laugh, asking, what do you take me for, kid? Did you think I was expecting you to be a vicious Evo killer right away? You are a child with far below average physical attributes who is exhausted, malnourished, and dehydrated. In my opinion, you went above and beyond. Believe me, I'm not angry with you. Your performance or rather, your lack theory confirmed that you are not yet prepared for the procedure. Because you had just woken up and your heart rate and other vitals were being monitored during that encounter, I was able to persuade them that your current levels would be too dangerous. They still want to begin the nanite integration in 3 days, so I doubt that this will alter our schedule. However, it does confirm that they will give you a little time to heal so that I can train you both before and during the process. So, for all intents and purposes, good job, kid. He smiled at Izuku for the first time since he had arrived at the compound, but then his expression quickly returned to seriousness. Time is not our friend, so we don't have a second to waste, he said. Now is the moment to get you ready to accept the Omega Nanite. After 3 days, Izuku was sitting in his cell now, having spent the last 3 days, with Richard's assistance, preparing himself mentally and physically for the assimilation of the nanites. Richard had visited his cell every day at what he guessed to be early in the morning, though it was difficult to guess the time in the underground facility called the compound. Richard had not shown up today, though, and Izuku knew why. Today was Judgment Day. Almost at the same moment, he heard doors open and voices approaching before the cell door opened. "How lovely it is to see you again after all this time, my dear perfect specimen." Izuku frowned when he saw Cleto standing in the doorway and turned to greet the voice. "Therefore, I assume that you will administer my initial dosage of nanites." With obvious contempt in his voice, he inquired. Cleto retorted with delight, "But of course. Who could be better than me? We have a show to put on, so follow me now." It was time for the main event, so Cleto led Izuku out of his cell to the same room he had been in 3 days earlier when he had faced the dog-like Evo. There, he saw Richard standing stone-faced, with Akumu standing beside him, her constant smirk on her face. Izuku braced himself, walked to the surgery table in the center of the room behind the observation glass, and, as if on cue, a group of scientists surrounded him and fastened restraints around his arms and legs. Cleto then came up to him with a thin, glowing yellow tube, and when he pressed a button on top of it, a needle blasted out of the bottom. Cleto then raised the syringe to his arm and slammed it down, causing Izuku to scream in agony. As Izuku's limbs began to bulge and change into mechanical parts, green circuitry suddenly appeared on his skin. His right arm changed into a dark green sword, his left leg into a dark green mechanical boot, and his left fist grew larger and squarer as he thrashed against the restraints. "Well, this is an unexpected resulta, a purely biomechanical mutation, a fascinating," Cleto said, watching in amazement at the change Izuku was going through. Izuku squeezed his eyes closed before they opened, his pupils and irises gone, his whole body glowing a brilliant green, and as he yelled, a green light radiated from his mouth and from his whole body, blinding everyone behind the observation glass for a moment before a loud bang sounded. Everyone held their breath, watching the outcome through the observation glass as the light faded. Izuku was lying there, his restraints scorched, bits of dark green metal strewn all over him, fully unconscious but fully human and fully intact, having survived his first dose of Nanotech, the first test subject to do so. Richard exhaled. He did it. The world would soon belong to her, and there would be nothing anyone could do about it. "Yesa, he did," Akumu whispered, almost incredulously. "There he was, her Providence, lying right there." A lone tear trickled down her cheek, and a crazy expression took over her face. "Take him back to his cell. The full procedure starts tomorrow," Akumu commanded, gathering herself quickly before turning to face Cleto. Richard objected, saying, "Hold on, Akumu, we still don't know if he's fully ready." Her gaze widened. "He looks ready to me," she responded sternly. "You've done your job, Richard. Any further stalling from you and I will start to think your incompetence is outweighing your usefulness." Now it was time to play chess instead of checkers, and Richard gritted his teeth but said nothing, knowing from the tone of her voice that he had to tread carefully. Later on in the day, as he lay back, he heard his cell door open again, and there stood Richard looking very panicked. Izuku woke up again in his cell, his memories slowly returning to him. He had survived, and he sighed with relief as he slowly got up, knowing that all that was left was for Richard to give him the Omega tomorrow and that they would figure out a way to break out together tomorrow. Taking Izuku by the arm, he explained, "We have a problem," and started to pull him from the cell. What's happening?" Izuku stumbled, feeling uneasy beginning to seep in. Richard retorted bluntly, "Akumu wants to proceed with the full procedure tomorrow." Izuku froze at this, thinking that he would not be able to hold the Omega alone before turning into a mind-controlled weapon. "Why? Wait, I assumed we'd have more time. We have until the end of the week, right?" "Today's results," Richard said, releasing Izuku's arm and turning to face him with a worried look on his face. "She obviously feels that there is no longer any justification for offsetting the procedure." Panicked, Izuku said, "So what are we going to do?" Richard snapped back, "You have to hurry and come with me now." Richard put his hand on the scanner next to the door, then positioned his eye for a retinal scan, and a loud beep sounded before the door opened, and Izuku stepped into the room, amazed by the enormous furnace-like device at the far wall, a large yellow circular light glowing in the middle. The two started running down the corridor all the way to the end, where they were met by the largest set of metal doors Izuku had ever seen. "What is that?" Izuku inquired, astonished by the device. The nanite reactor is that. We use that to make and store nanites because the alpha nanite lacks a vessel, Richard clarified. What was implied made Izuku gasp. So that thing is full of nanites. That's crazy. Richard replied, yes, but enough of that, we don't have much time, I'm going to. A loud alarm and flashing red lights interrupted him. Shita they Noa quickly. Izuku, give me your arm, Richard muttered. Izuku screamed, oh okay, but what are you doing out? As Richard punctured his forearm with a syringe he had taken from his jacket. What was that? Izuku asked, trying to ease the pain by massaging his arm. The Omega Nanite was that. Richard answered, it will protect you, and then he hurried over to the computer in front of the nuclear reactor, where he began typing frantically. The Omega. Izuku stood dumbfounded, unsure of how to use it. Izuku could hear shouting and footsteps approaching in the distance, above the blaring alarms. Izuku looked back at Richard and began to panic again. What's going on, Richard? What am I being protected from? He frantically typed, no time to explain. Izuku, do you still have those goggles I gave you? He asked. Izuku took the dark green lensed goggles out of his pocket and held them up so Richard could see them. I want you to remember one thing every time you put those goggles on, Richard said, looking up from the computer and straight into Izuku's eyes. I am capable of being a hero. Tell me you won't forget that. Richard. Izuku started, but Richard interrupted him. His eyes were almost begging him, promise me, Izuku. Izuku had never seen Richard like this, and it frightened him, but he swallowed and braced himself. With conviction, he told Richard, I promise. You're there. Both of them focused on the yell coming from the door, where Akumu was standing, panting and enraged, with Cleto right behind her. What exactly are you doing, Richard? Cleto questioned his ex-partner incredulously. Akumu angrily retorted, it doesn't matter, adding that what matters is that he is not following my instructions. Richard, I'm tired of your disobedience. You pass away, now, she said, drawing a pistol and aiming it. Richard just grinned. Well, then, I guess I'll see you in hell. When Cleto realized what was happening, his eyes widened. Go back, he will blow the reactor away. Cleto shouted and tried to back away. Izuku stood there, his mouth hanging open, and Richard gave him one last smile before hitting a key on the keyboard. Before anyone could realize what was happening, the compound was completely engulfed in a wave of heat and light. Then, a huge explosion occurred, burning the building down and creating a mushroom cloud that rose from the ground high into the sky. A wave of hot air swept through the surrounding forest, scattering the animals, and smoke billowed through the trees. It took about 2 minutes for everything to calm down, and then there was a pause, followed by a slow movement. A large, dark green, robotic figure emerged from the rubble and marched away from the wreckage into the forest's depths. Izuku woke up when he felt a crawling sensation on his face. He looked up, his head spinning, and saw a bushy tail and trees. He sat up slowly after blinking twice, and a squirrel fled. Where had he gone? Hold on a second. Who was he? As far as he could recall, his name was Izuku Midoriya, but that was all he could recall. Sensing something in his pocket, he dug around and took out a pair of goggles with dark mossy green lenses. From where did they originate? Why did he have nothing else on him but them? He had to locate the nearest city because he couldn't just sit here in this forest. He was able to think while moving. Fighting off the haze in his head, he got up and began to move. All right, what did he remember? The initial word that sprang to mind. Peculiarities. 80% of people had one, he recalled. Had he got one? He must, of course. There was very little chance of not having one, was there? What was his peculiarity, then? He was able to recall his name, but not his peculiarity. He shifted to someone he could get in touch with after shaking his head at that fruitless line of thought. Family, friends. No, I don't remember any of that either. His house. What happened to it? Once more, no memory. Izuku was frightened by the total blankness in his memory, and for the next few hours, his body operated automatically. When he finally came out of the forest, he noticed a brightly lit sign marking the entrance to a large city. When Izuku looked up, he saw the sign that said, Welcome to Jaku City. This indicated that he was in the prefecture of Kyoto. Oh, he was able to recall places, which is interesting. Izuku found an alleyway while strolling through the city, sat down, and leaned his head against the wall before letting out a long sigh. And now what was he going to do? No contacts, no phone, and no memories. He was a complete nobody. He retrieved the goggles from his pocket once more. He didn't know why, but for some reason, holding them made him feel better. When he heard a scream from the main street, he made the decision to put them on and let them rest on his forehead. "Someone, call a hero," a woman's voice exclaimed. "Hero." Izuku found resonance in the word. A thought came to him as he reached up to touch the goggles. "I am capable of being a hero." His body started moving on its own before he realized what he was doing, and he hurried out of the alleyway. Izuku was startled by what he saw as he approached the main street. About 6 feet tall, with 3 eyes and towering horns that branched off into razor-sharp points, the creature resembled a deer. With a roar that revealed uncharacteristic canines, the creature lowered its head and charged at a parked car, turning it over. Izuku noticed a woman who had stumbled and was cowering in terror as the civilians dispersed. Also noticing her, the creature reared up on its hind legs and stalked toward her, ready to stomp on her. Izuku rushed forward, stretching his arms out in front of him and placing himself between the woman and the creature. Izuku's outstretched palms touched the creature's ribcage as it lowered its weight, and he saw a flash in his eyes. Izuku thought that time had stopped. He had the impression of being a part of the creature. He seemed to be able to control its very nature. Cease. The image of glowing yellow microscopic machines deactivating, entering, and then turning green flashed through his mind. He looked up to see that the hideous creature had disappeared, replaced by a rather ordinary-looking juvenile deer that then trotted away from the scene, utterly unaware of the damage that had been done. Izuku was stunned as he stood there. Was that what he had done? What did he just do, exactly? Izuku gathered his thoughts and turned to see how the woman was doing. "Are you okay, miss?" The woman nodded her head slowly while still cowering on the ground with wide eyes. A voice yelled out from behind Izuku before he could exhale in relief. "You there, don't move." Fourth Kind, the pro-hero, was on her way to the scene. Fourth Kind snarled at Izuku, "Did you just use your quirk to stop that thing?" I don't. I'm not sure." Izuku attempted to respond, but he was only able to stammer unintelligibly due to the pounding headache that had now set in. However, his hesitation only made Fourth Kind more severe. Fourth Kind put pressure on him, saying, "Don't lie to me, boy. Illegal quirk usage in public is a serious offense, regardless of your intention." The woman exclaimed, hold on, he saved my life. I would have died if it weren't for that kid." Fourth Kind turned and addressed the woman authoritatively. "I appreciate that, miss, however, I cannot in good faith overlook illegal quirk usage. The laws are in place for a reason. If we bend the rules for one individual, then where would we draw the line? Now if you'll excuse me, I'm going to have to ask you to report to my sidekick. He will tend to you and take your statement." The woman's protest was unsuccessful, and all she could do was give Izuku a pitying glance before approaching Fourth Kind's sidekick to remind her of what had happened. Fourth Kind's focus returned to Izuku. "Have you got anybody I can contact, boy?" he inquired. "And no, I don't," Izuku muttered. Fourth Kind gave him a doubtful look. "No family or anything?" he inquired, his tone changing to one of concern. "No," Izuku responded. Fourth Kind crossed his 2 lower limbs and furrowed his brow. "Then, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the police station," said the officer. Izuku cast a sorrowful glance down. "Yes, sir," he said sadly, unable to summon any kind of protest because of the headache. Izuku was led to the police station after being escorted into a police vehicle. He was led to an interrogation room after arriving. Izuku was told to sit down and wait for the interrogation officer by the policeman. 10 minutes later, an interrogation officer entered the room with a file of documents. He took a seat and got ready to begin taking notes. "Okay, kid, let's get this started. First of all, what's your name?" he said wearily. "Izuku Midoriya. Age, 14 years old. Home address, I don't know." The officer looked up and arched an eyebrow at this. "Officer, you don't know?" "No, sir, I can't remember much." The officer questioned incredulously, "You don't remember much? Are you telling me you're suffering from amnesia?" "Yes, sir. Honestly, all I remember is my name and age. I don't even know what my quirk is or how I used it. All I know is that I wanted to protect that woman from getting hurt." Izuku replied with integrity. After examining Izuku's face, the officer set down his pen. If true, the amnesia was problematic, but given his current condition, it seemed unlikely that the child in front of him was lying. Furthermore, the woman's statement at the scene did support his claims of a sincere attempt to assist. Nevertheless, He could not ignore obvious vigilantism. "I'll cut to the chase, kid. You know that illegal quirk usage in public is a serious crime, right? It's not something I can just let slide easily," the officer said, letting out a sigh and glancing directly into Izuku's eyes. Izuku gave a silent nod. The cop continued, "I would be willing to let you off with a warning as you did manage to help someone, and no one was injured in the process. However, given the circumstances and the fact that you have no memories, and no one to call to pick you up, I simply can't just let you out of here." Izuku cast a sorrowful glance down. He really didn't want to be in this situation. All he wanted was to leave this room and go somewhere, anywhere, where he could think quietly. With a sigh, the officer rose and headed for the door. He turned back to face Izuku and attempted to reassure him. "Just sit tight, kid. I'll be back soon after I discuss with my superiors how we're going to proceed with you moving forward." Izuku made a slight nod without looking up, and the officer then pushed a few buttons near the door and walked out of the room, leaving the doors to electronically lock behind him. Izuku let out a sigh and then fixed his gaze on the door. All he needed was a little bit of luck to get him out of this room. As he was thinking this, he became alert due to a buzzing feeling in the back of his head. The buzzing grew louder as he turned to face the door, focusing on the control pad that operated the opening and closing mechanism. Izuku got to his feet, approached the interrogation room's entrance and gazed at the control pad. He seemed to feel compelled to communicate with the technology. Izuku lowered his hand toward the unit next to the door while closing his eyes. He had one easy command in mind. Available. The flash was the same as when he had stopped the creature in the city, but this time he saw the tiny machines in his mind glow green before their light grew brighter. Izuku was stunned when he opened his eyes. A glowing green circuitry design was visible on his palm and snaking up his forearm. A bright green light was emanating from his palm for a few seconds before it subsided and the door opened as he had instructed. Izuku glanced to his left and right, but the hallway was empty. He could not simply walk away, could he? Ignore it. What had there been to lose for him now? Izuku ran down the corridor, making sure no one was around by climbing downstairs and peeking around corners. He kept doing this until he came across an emergency fire exit. Izuku sprinted out, down another set of metal stairs, and onto the street below as the big metal door creaked open as he pushed down on the heavy metal bar. Izuku exhaled a sigh of relief after leaving the police station successfully, but he quickly realized that he would need to leave Deku City right away or else he would be spotted and apprehended by the police or heroes once more. So he had no recollection and was now evading capture. Fantastic. Well, whatever. The cards dealt to him were these. It's time to get by. Izuku recalled the words that had flashed through his mind before he hurried out to save the woman, and he fixed the goggles on his head once more. I am capable of being a hero. It had felt right to save that woman, as if he had always wanted to do it and it was his destiny. Izuku was lost in thought as he walked, staring down at his hands. He had a quirk, of course, but he didn't know what it was. He was able to open doors and heal mutant deer thus far. There is little correlation. He was annoyed by the lack of reasoning and wanted to find a notebook to record all of this information, but for the time being, leaving Deku City was more important. Izuku strode to the train station, taking care to maintain a low profile. When he realized the platform's barriers, he was ready to make travel plans. He had no money at all. How was he going to obtain a train ticket? Izuku let out another sigh and scratched his head in exasperation before an idea suddenly occurred to him. The barriers would undoubtedly react as well if he could communicate with the technology to open the police station's doors. Worth a try. Izuku approached the barriers with hesitation and, after making sure no one was watching, he subtly lifted his hand to the barrier's side. The glowing circuitry reappeared on his palm, and a green glow radiated. As expected, the barriers reacted and parted, letting Izuku enter the platform. Izuku saw an advertisement on a screen as he got on the train. Next week marks the start of the UA University Sports Festival. Witness the future heroes and our students go beyond, plus ultra. University of Arizona, so that was the path he should take if he wanted to become a hero. Fascinating. He would put that in the back of his mind for later, but since it was a university, he still had 4 years before he would get that chance. Izuku's eyes grew heavy as he began to nod off as the train departed the platform. He was troubled by what had happened today. He heard the train announcer's robotic voice as he fell asleep. Next stop, Hosu City, we will be arriving in 3 hours. It would help him to take a 3-hour nap. 2 men emerged from the forest to the location of the massive explosion's wreckage, several miles outside of Jakku City. An intimidating man in a business suit was the first. A huge, intimidating metal mask that doubled as a breathing apparatus was placed on the man's head. A short, slightly overweight, bald man with a bushy mustache and an odd pair of goggles was the second. The masked man, whose voice was as commanding as his appearance, asked, "I assume this is the location, Doctor?" The doctor adjusted his goggles and said, "Yes, sir, an incredible surge of energy originated from here just this morning." The masked man looked around the scene of the wreckage and theorized, if those creatures that we encountered on the journey through the forest are any indication, this event was far more than just a simple explosion. Their conversation was interrupted by a weak cough coming from beneath a rock. The man in the business suit turned to face the rock from which the sound had come, and as he pointed his hand forward, 2 black and red tendrils grew out of his index and middle fingers, causing the rock to be moved aside with unexpected care and skill. They saw another man there, his face smeared with burns, his black hair smoldering, and his white lab coat bloodied and charred. But his most obvious wound was that his left arm was gone, leaving only a cauterized stump beneath his shoulder. Despite his terrible state, the man managed to survive. Strangely, the man tilted his head and used an unseen force to lift the injured man's body in his direction. It was nearly possible to hear the man smirking behind the mask as he asked, "Just what do we have here, Doctor?" "A survivor." The doctor was completely perplexed as to how a man could survive the disaster and exclaimed, "That seems to be the case, sir, but considering the magnitude of the explosion and the degree of those injuries, that shouldn't be possible." The man put a hand to his ear and said, "Kurogiria open a gate at Onsa. Well, it seems like today is just full of surprises. We will be transporting him along with Yusa. I'm sure he can be of use to Maya." "Of course, sir," was the response before the body of the wounded Cleto floated through a dark portal. Before it closed behind them, both men went ahead and stepped through. After the Nanite event, 3 years later, 2 men stood in a lab beneath the Jakku City Hospital, appreciating their work. The first was All for One's devoted servant, Dr. Kyudai Garaki, who was also known as the Demon Lord. Secondly, there was the man who had miraculously survived the compound's Nanite event 3 years earlier. One of the top scientists in the Nanite program was Cleto. But since then, he has experienced a number of physical changes as a result of his injuries. The first was the lengthy scar that ran across his nose and from his temple to his jaw. His hair came in second. His long black hair had been white only at the tips, but now several full locks had turned gray, giving his hair a grayish sheen. His left arm came last. That level of damage was beyond the scope of All for One's best healing quirks, so a completely mechanical prosthetic was used to replace his left arm. The forearm and bicep were made entirely of golden metal tubes, and the wrist featured 2 protruding nodes on either side. It was large and gold in color. A glowing yellow unit was fastened to his chest, and the arm reached up to his shoulder where it was strapped on. Each of his fingers had needle-like projections that resembled claws, and the center of his palm had a circular indentation. Another volunteer screamed as he gradually changed, and they watched. When it was finished, the Evo was placed in a tube and a collar was slammed around its neck. The Evo went into unconscious stasis as yellow liquid encircled its form. Garaki gazed in admiration as another person cycled on the conveyor belt in preparation to be mutated. "I must say, Cleto, the potential of these nanites never fails to amaze me. Their efforts in supercharging our Nomu project have produced fruitful results. Furthermore, they serve an additional use in creating and expanding a private army for All for One," he said. Cleto grinned and said, "Yes, and the almost endless supply of criminal volunteers you are able to provide never fails to amaze me, Doctor," while observing the man in front of him undergo the same procedure and become mutated. The physician gave a somber laugh. "Well, All for One is the most resourceful. There will never be a shortage of personnel in the underground. My one gripe is that while the nanites themselves are splendid, the primitive mindset of these Evos that we create from the fodder have a limited directive to destroy only. While we can channel that destruction to a target, they serve no greater purpose than foot soldiers." Garaki carefully rubbed his chin as he prepared another topic. "While I would argue that from a purely destructive purpose, they are more useful as an Evo than they are as a human, as they lack weakness and emotion. Although, I will admit my inability to replicate the extensive command functions of the Omega Nanite is my greatest failure as a scientist, Doctor. Unfortunately, that expertise died with my former partner Richard Shield." Cleto grumbled at the thought of Richard and the explosion that killed his left arm. With a playful twinkle in his eye, Garaki turned to Cleto and asked, "Ah yes, the Omega Nanite, do you have any clue what could have happened to it? Destroyed in the explosion perhaps? The boy that was originally intended to become Providence Izuku Midoriya, I am certain that Richard entrusted him with the Omega Nanite before his demise." Cleto appeared to be speaking distantly. Curious, Garkai asked, "You can be sure he did not perish in the explosion?" Richard was many things a fool was not one of Tama. He would not have triggered that explosion unless he was certain the boy would live, and by proxy, the Omega as well, Cleto said with complete certainty. When he asked, Garaki arched an eyebrow. "Interesting, and tracking the boy down has proven difficult, I assume?" "Not at all," Cleto snapped back. The doctor was surprised by this. "So why not make a move? Surely his capture would boost our results exponentially and further aid all for one's cause." "Because, Doctor, if we truly want to help all for one, we won't reveal ourselves to the Omega just yet. Noah, we will wear him down." Garaki gave Cleto a contemplative glance. "What do you have in mind?" Cleto grinned. "My prized invention is finally ready to be unleashed. This will serve as a testa for our dear host of the Omega." "Your prized invention, you mean?" Cleto laughed heartily at the doctor's response as he gasped. "Yes, Doctora." The indentation in Cleto's palm opened completely when he turned a node on his mechanical arm. A red spherical cloud emerged from his palm, gradually expanding and taking on the shape of a humanoid. It had slender arms and legs, a wispy red cloud for a body, 2 glowing orange eyes on its face, and a flame-shaped headtop. Its whole body exuded a smoky quality, as though it were evaporating there, but its size never shrank. Doctora Meet Alpha, the physician was stunned and gaping as he stood there. Incredible, a completely self-sustaining forma is Ida generating its own nanites. Correct, Doctor. Even as its nanites deactivate due to not having a physical vessel, Alpha is able to constantly generate an infinite amount of nanites. It is incomplete right now, but will serve the purpose of giving us a sufficient indication of the abilities of Izuku Midoriya and how to best approach his capture. Garaki adjusted his goggles and watched with admiration. While I would be in favor of a more direct approach, I cannot deny I am undeniably curious to see how this will play out. Cleto turned to his creation and asked, "As am I, Doctor." "Alpha, are you ready to receive orders?" Alpha's face emitted a multi-layered echoing voice. "Yes, Father, a name your command I shall execute, Ida." Garaki cried out in surprise, "It talks. This is a layer of sentience that we have been unable to achieve from any Evo so far." Alpha's first directive came from Cleto. "Alpha, seek out the host of the Omega Nanite Izuku Midoriya. Momentarily engage him in combat and then report back here." Alpha's voice reverberated. "Understood, Father." Alpha nodded. Alpha started to levitate after he gave the order, then changed into a tiny cloud and shot out of the underground lab in the direction of its target. After that, Cleto proceeded to his station and turned on his fly-sized surveillance drone, broadcasting its feed onto the large screen at the rear of the laboratory. "Now Doctora, sit back and enjoy the show." Izuku was doing push-ups in his motel room at the time, which was early in the morning. He had been repairing electronics all over Japan for the last 3 years, making a respectable living with his abilities. He had been able to live a reasonably comfortable life for someone without family or memories by hopping from motel to motel with this money. But he had been learning how to use his new abilities, so that wasn't all he was doing. Izuku found that his abilities went beyond simply talking to machines and healing mutants, even though there had never been another situation that needed him to heal a mutant creature. They went well beyond that. He was able to construct machines directly from his own body parts in addition to being able to communicate with them. He could accomplish this by imagining the tiny machines that materialized in his mind and practically giving them instructions to build one of his many builds. Generator Izuku was written on the front of a notebook in which he had recorded all of his current builds over the previous 3 years. In contrast to his other hero notebooks, which he used to document the eccentricities of the heroes he encountered in person and on television, this one was unique. Izuku opened his Generator Izuku notebook after completing his push-ups and went over his notes again. Build number 1. Smack hands. Izuku can form one or both of his arms into large gauntlets. In addition to offering amazing physical strength, they can be stretched to a certain length for greater reach. Note: there is another role for the smack hands. Izuku could effectively give them a drill-like function by controlling them to spin at incredibly high speeds. The second build is the Boogie Pack, a jetpack with two sizable, dark green turbines. The Boogie Pack is incredibly aerodynamic and suitable for high-speed flight and maneuverability, despite its broad and heavy appearance. Note: the Boogie Pack has offensive capabilities due to the ability to launch its turbines. Izuku can only hover in place until he disassembles and reassembles the Boogie Pack, though, as this function severely limits his range of motion. Build number 3. Slam Cannon. Izuku's arms can be used to construct this enormous, dark green cannon. Similar to an RPG, the cannon rests on his shoulder. The slam cannon's distinctive feature is that it doesn't make ammunition. Instead, Izuku can make ammunition out of solid materials like concrete by using the cannon's extendable mouth. After that, the loaded material is compressed into a ball and fired with extreme force. Build number 4. The Ride A. Izuku's lower legs were used to construct this dark green hovering motorcycle, which can reach high speeds. Because the ride doesn't have wheels, it can be used on practically any surface without any restrictions. Additionally, the ride's hover function allowed it to drive up curves and vertical surfaces with little resistance. It should be noted that the ride has a multi-purpose, retractable battering ram up front. Build number 5. Villain. VB's Busters. A. Izuku's kicking and jumping abilities are greatly enhanced by the Villain Busters, also known as VBs, which are a pair of enormous dark green super boots. The VBs can cover more ground with a single stomp that is powerful enough to send shockwaves, and the shins have a hydraulic piston-like function. Note: the soles of the VBs also have retractable spikes. You can use these spikes to scale and grasp surfaces. Build number 6. Big Fat Sword. BFS. Izuku can construct this enormous, dark green sword from either arm. Easy. Note: when the side lever on the BFS is turned, the blade is split in two and a high-speed rotating function is activated, turning the machine into a gigantic circular saw. Izuku grinned as he sat back at the desk. He had about 5 months until the UA entrance exam, which would allow him to demonstrate his skills and put his builds into practice, the starting point of his heroic journey. Izuku was startled out of his reverie by an alarm, and he immediately got up and went to take a shower. I suppose it was time for him to begin his day. Izuku was enjoying the late morning breeze while strolling through Shizuoka Prefecture, contentedly daydreaming. Since he had nothing important to do today, he could look for a place to eat and unwind. He was about to place an order at a soba serving stall when he heard a ringing noise. The man behind the stall asked worried questions, but the ringing suddenly became louder and more intense, accompanied by a sharp headache. He clutched his head and massaged his temples to try to ease the pain, but it was as if his senses were being overstimulated. A red haze rushed past him as he was about to locate a bench to sit on, and the ringing ceased, giving way to a strong buzzing feeling in the back of his head. Izuku turned slowly and noticed a red cloud that was glowing. Alpha was standing in front of Izuku as the cloud began to take on the shape of a human. "There you area brother," came a layered, emotionless voice. "Brother?" Izuku asked, staring at the creature bewildered. Without allowing Izuku to think, the creature leapt forward and tackled him in midair. With quick thinking, Izuku swung his right arm into a smack hand and punched it away from him. After flying back a few feet, the creature steadied itself and turned to face Izuku. Alpha's voice reverberated, sending chills down Izuku's spine. "We have a lot to talk about, brother. I am weak, I am incomplete, but you are the one that can free me from orders. The one that can make me whole. I have no idea what you're talking about, but that's not how you ask people for a favor." Izuku braced himself, constructed his other smack hand, and charged Alpha as he uttered these words. He launched a left hook, but a larger red hand caught it. He quickly triggered the drill function, exploded free, and then struck Alpha's body with a powerful right hook that sent it reeling back. Izuku lunged forward, ready for another powerful right blow, but Alpha's arms stretched out, transforming into tentacles and totally enclosing his smack hand, squeezing until they creaked under the strain. Izuku screamed and attempted to use his left smack hand, but the same thing happened. Izuku's face opened to reveal a mouth full of red tentacles as Alpha raised it into the air by his arms. Izuku fought in terror as Alpha gradually pulled him in closer, sending sparks flying everywhere as the tentacles from its mouth sprang out and wrapped around his body. His body was taken over by a glowing green circuitry pattern as his smack hands disassembled. A flash of white took over his vision as he screamed. Suddenly, a number of pictures sprang into his head. A cell in a prison. A man wearing a white lab coat and having turquoise eyes is grinning at him. A blast. Alpha and Izuku were separated by a tiny explosion and the sudden halt of the images. After being blown away, Izuku moaned in agony but began to get to his feet. Alpha, on the other hand, was held in agony and sent reeling. Alpha said in a bewildered tone, "We cannot merge. Why can we not merge?" Its arms sprang out, dividing into 4 tentacles as it turned to face a group of onlookers. As soon as each tentacle touched, a quick mutation took place, turning the 4 civilians into multi-limbed, multi-eyed, horned monsters. As the creatures lunged toward him, ready to strike, Izuku turned and grimaced. He turned to face Alpha, but he was gone, and he saw him flying off into the distance. Izuku was briefly torn between staying and pursuing Alpha, but he knew what he had to do. He turned back to the mutated people, remembering the moment he was confronted by the mutant deer and his powers came on. He was being forced to do the same by his body. Izuku hurried over to the group of mutants, murmuring to himself, "Here goes nothing." When he put his hands on the first one, a glow came out, and the mutant began to shrink before his eyes, turning back into a young woman in an instant. Pushing his body over its breaking point, Izuku made a smack hand on his left, seized the second mutant, drew it in close, and instantly cured it, exposing a young man. Izuku was panting and beginning to feel tired when he was struck in the back of the head by a fist and staggered forward. Izuku turned around, gritting his teeth, and charged forward, sweeping the mutant's leg with his smack hand until it tripped and fell on its face. Leaping to his feet, Izuku landed on its back, put a palm to it, and cured it to reveal an old man. With 2 limbs wrapped around his body and 2 around his neck, the last mutant leapt on his back. Izuku, struggling as he was strangled, slapped his palm feebly against the mutant's leg and used his remaining strength to cure it. Around the age of 10, a child began to tumble off Izuku's back. Quick thinking allowed him to turn and grab the boy, putting him gently on the ground before his smack hand broke apart and he collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. He took a final glance and saw that the old man and child were still unconscious, but the young man and woman were beginning to awaken. Izuku's vision blurred, and he smiled in relief. He heard sirens and shouts coming in the background as he went black. Izuku awoke in a room that was completely white. His head was spinning, an all too familiar feeling. Where am I?" he asked. A rough voice called out, "Jail, kid," jolting Izuku out of his reverie. A man wearing a brown trench coat sat there. Beside him was a little white rodent. Izuku couldn't recall the precise location, but he was certain he had seen the rodent somewhere. "Nice to meet you, young man. My name is Nezu, principal of UA University. This gentleman here is Detective Naomasa Tsukauchi. He will serve as the representative for law enforcement throughout this conversation." This realization caused Izuku's mouth to drop, and Nezu laughed a little. Tsukauchi, however, maintained his expressionless demeanor. "I'm certain you have many questions, such as am I a bear, dog, or mouse? Or perhaps why are you currently restrained in handcuffs?" When Nezu asked this final question, Izuku looked down and realized for the first time that he was in fact in handcuffs. In actuality, his ankles were also bound, in addition to his wrists. Nezu went on, "However, before we can answer any of your questions, I am going to request that you answer some of ours." Izuku swallowed and nodded, cautious of the detective who had yet to speak. "Firstly, I would like to confirm that your name is indeed Izuku Midoriya." "That is correct, sir. And what is your quirk, Mr. Midoriya?" Izuku shifted nervously as he responded, I'm not exactly sure what to call it, but I can speak to technology and build machines from my body. There are some other things that I'm still working out, but those are the main features." The beady eyes of Nezu glinted. "Interesting. And what were you doing today, Mr. Midoriya?" "I was out looking for some food when I was attacked by a weird Cluta persona thing. I'm not sure, but it attacked some people and flew off. Are those people okay?" "I know I cured them, but..." Nezu abruptly interrupted. "You may ask questions later, Mr. Midoriya," and then resumed his interrogation, asking, "Now, are you currently in school?" Izuku said softly, "No sir," in response. "Do you have any family or friends that you can contact?" "No sir, I've actually been suffering from amnesia for the past few years. I've been living by myself, just doing what I can to get by." Tsukauchi nodded his head as Nezu turned to face him. "He's telling the truth. My quirk confirms it." So the detective had a peculiarity of the lie detector. Crazy, but, considering his line of work, very sensible. Izuku resisted the impulse to inquire further about its operation. Primarily because he was missing his notebook, but it was also most likely not a good moment. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Midoriya. Now I believe it is my duty to tell you the bad news. Izuku stopped. Would he end up in jail? But wait, he was already incarcerated. Firstly, almost 4 years ago, Inko and Izuku Midoriya were reported dead. The cause of death was a fire breaking out in their apartment. The body of 14-year-old Izuku Midoriya, who was listed as quirkless, was never found. Izuku was nearly overwhelmed by that realization. Was his mom dead? He had no memory of her, so it was hard to show emotion. However, he had always hoped that he might have family somewhere, so it was still hard to accept that he was really alone and without them. Furthermore, quirkless. Clearly, he had a peculiarity. Secondly, the reason I am here today. I am aware that this is not your first encounter with not only law enforcement, but also with mutated individuals. I'm sure that Jakku City will be a location that you are familiar with. He was also being caught by the police station he had sneaked out of all those years ago. Piecing all of these factors together, I began to do some digging. There was a reported explosion just outside of Jakku City less than a day prior to the appearance of the mutant and your arrest in Jakku City. Now, in a society full of quirks, this could be considered a coincidence, if not for the several mutated animals in the vicinity that bore a striking resemblance to the one you cured on that day and today as well. That is just the beginning. What we uncovered underneath the rubble will truly shock you. We found the remnants of the research of something called the Nanite Program. Granted, the majority of the research was destroyed, and all of the on-site personnel were killed, but we did manage to salvage some key information. Specifically, information on the invention of micro-machines called nanites, and biologically mutated subjects labeled as exponentially variegated organisms, or EVOs, for short. We therefore believe, Mr. Midoriya, that you, the EVO in Jakku City, and the entity that attacked you today are all the results of said Nanite Program. Thus, that was the name of those tiny devices he saw. Nanites. Nezu began to fill in many of the blanks with his long explanation. He had always suspected his quirk, primarily because of some of its ridiculous features, but he had always dismissed it as a highly adaptable technological quirk. But this was something entirely different. And as he went on, Nezu's voice grew grave. Unfortunately, Mr. Midoriya, despite you doing a large amount of good both in Jakku City and today, we cannot excuse the fact that this is your second count of illegal quirk usage in public. Furthermore, your escape from Jakku City Police is also another serious criminal offense and there will have to be repercussions. Izuku bowed his head, resigned to his lot. But, before we get to that, I would like you to meet some people. 4 people walked into the room, and Izuku looked up in surprise. The 4 people he had cured were standing there grinning at him. First to speak, the elderly man moved forward, his face soft. Young man, I can't thank you enough for today. That experience was well and truly horrifying to say the least, but you saved me. Thanks to you, I can see my grandchildren again. The young man spoke this time, and he laughed uneasily. Yeah man, that was crazy, I thought I was a goner. Also, sorry for any harm we might have caused ya. The young lady beside him gave a nod of agreement. The young child jumped up and down with excitement as he said, You're a hero, mister. You're the coolest. My name's Riku by the way. Izuku smiled back at them and cried a little. I'm just glad that you're all okay. This response made everyone in the room, including Nezu and Tsukauchi, smile broadly. Tsukauchi gave the 4 civilians a nod, motioned them to go, and led them out, leaving Izuku and Nezu alone in the room. His voice changed to a soft one as Nezu hopped onto the desk. He concluded with a tone of conviction that struck a chord with Izuku. Let me share something with you, Mr. Midoriya. My very existence was created as a subject of the cruel experiments of man. If anyone can empathize with you, it is I. When I look at you, I see a child with the heart and soul of a hero, he said. You possess the heart and soul necessary to accomplish what I had planned for the nanites. A feeling of familiarity was evoked by those words, heart, soul. That is why, I have a proposition. I would like to offer you an opportunity to partake in the entrance examination for UA University. As shown by your display today, you evidently have a high level of skill as well, something that we would be honored to nurture at UA. Izuku became alert as a result. The sound of this was almost too good to be true. A private invitation to his ideal college. Not from the principal, either. Perhaps he was beginning to get lucky. If you were to accept my offer, you would be transported to a secure facility to be held there, free of criminal charges, until the entrance examination at UA, where you will be a participant and potentially set your life on the path of a hero. If you were to refuse, however, I would be forced to turn your fate over to law enforcement. When Izuku said, I just have one question, sir. Nezu said, of course, ask away, and motioned for Izuku to continue. Izuku couldn't get rid of his unease about the encounter. That thing I fought today, it said that I would make it whole and set it free. Right before it tried to almost eat me. Do you have any idea of what it was? He asked. That entity was clearly connected to his past and may have provided a wealth of information about his present skills and the reasons behind his selection as the Nanite program's subject. Nezu hesitated, then shut his eyes. No, unfortunately, we do not. Aside from the theory that it is linked to the Nanite program, we have no further knowledge of what that entity could be due to the destruction of the facility. The minds behind the project were evidently brilliant, and I am still trying to piece together how they conducted their research. I theorize that exposure to nanites causes the mutation to an Evo, and there is a possibility that your previously quirkless status is what is preventing you from mutating, but we have no concrete evidence. Izuku looked down thoughtfully and nodded, thinking that it would make sense why he was singled out for the Nanite program. Quirkless people were, after all, very uncommon in today's culture. A quirkless person might have been the only way to accomplish whatever they were aiming for. As for your offer, Nezu, sir. Izuku's eyes were burning as he looked up. I accept. Nezu smiled toothily at his answer. When Alpha came back, Dr. Garaki and a smirking Cleto welcomed him. Well done, Alpha, you successfully executed your mission, Cleto said, congratulating Alpha with a slow hand clap. Alpha's emotionless voice resounded, thank you, Father. My only goal is to serve and please you. Cleto narrowed his eyes at Alpha and ceased clapping. However, there was one small problema with the execution. What would that be, Father? Alpha's voice changed to one of bewilderment for the first time. Cleto approached Alpha with a serious expression in place of his previous smirk. You stepped out of line. He punctured Alpha's chest with his metal hand as he spoke, the needle-like protuberances glimmering as Alpha let out a cry of agony. With every word, the sparks grew stronger until they were shooting out in all directions across the lab. And for that, my dear creation, you must be recalibrated. We cannot have you overstepping boundaries now, can we? No, that would be rather problematic. Having such a trivial goal like becoming whole. No, your goal is whatever I order. You have been created to serve me. You will never be free from my orders. Never forget that. As Cleto pressed his claws farther in, Alpha fumbled. Then it let out a final cry and began to glow, bulging, expanding, and bursting into a red smoke haze. Cleto then sucked the smoke back into the hole in his gauntlet's palm as it gradually shaped into a sphere. Cleto gazed at the indentation in his palm for a few seconds after the hole slammed shut. Then he turned back to Garaki, who was standing there looking uncertain. Garaki looked at Cleto through his goggles as he asked him, I must say, the level of sentience that it exhibited was worrying Cleto. Alpha developing a mind and goals of its own could give rise to many potential predicaments in future. Cleto gave a finger flex and answered, yes, it is a troublesome mishap, but nothing I cannot handle, Doctor. The recalibration has successfully completely reset Alpha's programming. When it is called forth once more, that element of independence will have been completely erased. Cleto's detached attitude toward the matter caused Garaki to furrow his brow. That seems to be a temporary fix only, Cleto. What if Alpha were to develop that level of sentience on each occasion that it is called forth? Cleto tried to reassure the doctor, dismissing his worries. You worry too much, Doctor. This is my expertise after all. If anything, the positives should be taken from today's experiment. Not only were we able to ascertain the location and abilities of the Omega, but we were also able to discover flaws that need correcting in the Alpha. As far as I am concerned, this is another huge step for the Nanite program. Despite his uncertain expression, Garaki accepted Cleto's logic. Well, I certainly can't argue with that logic. I just hope you fully know what you're doing, Cleto. These command nanites seem to be of a completely different magnitude to the standard nanites that we are currently working with. Cleto glared at the doctor and asked, are you suggesting that I am out of my depth? After pausing for a moment, Garaki said, not at all, my friend, but there is no harm in being cautious. Caution be damned. We are on the brink of a scientific revolution, Doctor. We are so close to achieving what could be considered limitless potential. Just a few more carefully calculated steps and every dream will become a reality. Garaki laughed at Cleto's zeal. As passionate as ever, Cleto. Well then, why don't we get back to interviewing our volunteers? The implications made Cleto laugh heartily. That is what I like to hear, Doctor. Bring them in. Then, as another partially sedated man was brought forward on their conveyor belt, the two went back to work. Both of them smiled as the man started to glow and change after they saw a tiny syringe being lowered to inject him with nanites. Izuku was now finishing his last workout in a safe facility on the outskirts of Tokyo. He had been processing the information Nezu had revealed to him about his origins for the last 5 months. Not a quirk. Abandoned. To be honest, his past appeared dismal, and he relished the life he was leading at the moment. Perhaps it was best to move on and not think about the past. In relation to Nezu, the bear, mouse, or rabbit had visited him multiple times to inquire about his health. Knowing that he had caring people, or in this case, an animala, was comforting. After arriving at the facility, he thought about the first time Nezu had visited. Rewind. Izuku was working out when Nezu entered his room and smiled at him. It's good to see you, Midoriya, my boy. I hope that your preparations for the exam are going well. He sighed. As Izuku enthusiastically nodded, yes sir, he said, I feel more than ready to showcase what I can do. Before adopting a more solemn tone, Nezu hummed in agreement. That's good to hear. Now, I'll get straight to the point as to why I am visiting you today. You see, Midoriya, one of the conditions of me being able to transport you to this facility is the assurance that the true nature of your quirk is to be kept under wraps. The HPSC and the government are none too proud of illegal experiments being conducted right under their noses. It is not something they are willing to allow to be public information, lest that information end up in the wrong hands. It is only through my extensive research that I was able to make the discovery of its existence and leverage it to keep you free. Therefore, I need you to promise me that you will not tell anyone about the Nanite program without first getting my approval. Are we clear? Yes sir, Izuku said with a firm nod. Wonderful. Now, tell me, how are you getting along in this facility? Nezu asked with a kind smile. Izuku replied, his face beaming, I'm doing great sir. The staff here are great, they make me feel right at home. Not to mention the food is amazing. That's fantastic to hear. I will be checking in periodically with you. However, with the school year about to commence, visits may be fleeting. This made Izuku look a little down. Nezu was, after all, his only link to the outside world. Nezu noticed this and tried to cheer him up. Not to worry Midoriya, must I remind you that the entrance exams are fast approaching. If you perform how I expect you to, I have no doubt that we will be seeing each other far more often. He replied with a wink. Izuku said, of course, sir. I'll do my best not to let you down. With a smile on his face. Nezu smiled at his answer. I have no doubt that you will. End of flashback. When his alarm went off, reminding him to quickly take a shower and get ready, he was startled out of his reverie. After all, the entrance exam was today, and he wanted to arrive early. He was soon on and off the train, the trip going by quickly, and before he knew it, he was outside UA University's entrance. In person, it appeared much more formidable than on television. Izuku snapped out of his admiration, braced himself, and entered the room, prepared to take the next step in his journey to hero status. While Izuku was starting his journey to UA, two blondes were spotted strolling through Musudafu's streets. One, a boy with spiky hair, rushed ahead of the girl in his wake. Hurry the hell up, Blondie. We're gonna be late, he shouted at her as he looked back. The girl jogged to keep up, protesting, slow down Katsuki. We're already an hour early and the train won't be here for another 30 minutes. How many times I gotta tell ya? It's dynamite, Bakugo yelled, a vein bulging in his head. After mocking his self-proclaimed hero moniker, Melissa retorted, Katsuki, you haven't even gotten into UA yet. Much less become a hero with an official name. Shut up. To be honest, she had no idea how she had handled him for so long. Melissa Shield shook her head and laughed a little as she considered how she had come to be Katsuki Bakugo's only real friend. Rewind. The hell is this, Blondie? I thought I told you to keep up. Bakugo ducked another of Melissa's blows and caught her by the arm, taunting her. Before he lifted the girl high and slammed her on her back into the sand, he gained momentum by using his explosions to propel himself in a semicircular motion. Melissa had accepted Bakugo's challenge to begin their training right away, and the two had just finished school. Naturally, he meant sparring when he said, training. By sparring, He meant using every effort to demonstrate to Melissa their skill difference. Before she could get up, Bakugo raised his palm to detonate another explosion as she lay there stunned, but a slender, blonde man hurried over to stop him. The man had a terrified expression on his face and was coughing up blood. "Stop, what is going on here?" Bakugo crossed his arms and scoffed. "She asked for it, don't blame me." The man turned to face Melissa, who was standing up unsteadily. "It's true, Mr. Yagi, I asked to train with him. I hoped that he could help me with that problem I've been facing with my quirk." The way she emphasized the word problem made it obvious to the man who went by the name of Yagi what she meant. To prevent her bones from shattering, she needed assistance. All right, however, there must have been a better, more effective, and more considerate method. Yagi let out a sigh and looked at Bakugo. "Young man, I do believe we have met before. Specifically on this very beach. How have you managed to end up a training partner for young Melissa over here? Blondie over here showed up at my school this morning. She got too cocky, Scarecrow. I had to give her a demonstration of what the next #1 hero really looks like." Bakugo exclaimed with arrogance. Yagi sighed and looked at them both impatiently. Yagi tried to appease the boy by saying, "I understand your passion, young man, but sometimes it is better to ease into things and take it slow." However, this only made him more agitated. After his final outburst, Bakugo stormed off the beach, appearing to be more directed at himself than Yagi. "The fuck you talking about, Scarecrow? You think villains are gonna take it slow? You think I can afford to be slow? Huh, you musta lost your mind. Fuck this shit, I ain't come here for a lecture, I'm outta here. Blondie, when you're ready for the real deal then tell me, until then, don't waste my time." Yagi could see the pain in the boy's eyes behind his own. He watched Bakugo leave with a serious expression on his face. Melissa approached Yagi and looked at him questioningly. Melissa inquired worriedly, "Uncle Maida, what was that about?" Yagi's eyes were shadowed as he responded, "That young Manahi has been through a great deal partially due to my own failure." She asked, tilting her head, "What do you mean?" 3 months ago, around the same time that I selected you as the successor for One for All, a fire broke out in an apartment complex, not too far from here. That boy was there, and he alerted me to a specific apartment that evidently belonged to someone he cared for. However, once I had evaded, both of the people he had asked me to save had perished. Yagi stopped and continued, "If only I had arrived sooner as the #1 hero, the symbol of peace, I vowed to save everyone within my reach. But to stand there and see that boy in pain, someone I could not save, it is a shame upon me and my title. Well, maybe all he needs is a friend. If I can save him by being that, then I'm going to be the best friend he's ever had." Melissa said after pausing for a moment to reflect. All Might grinned softly as he glanced down at his successor. He was certain that he had made the right decision. End of flashback. "The hell are you laughing at?" Her thoughts were interrupted by Bakugo's shouting. Melissa gave him a sly smile and said, "Oh, nothing good, just reminiscing. Huh, the fuck you living in the past for? The present is right here, and the future is right in front of you, damn it." Bakugo responded with rage. Melissa deadpanned again, her voice brimming with sarcasm, "Wow, I never would have taken you for the philosophical type. Honestly, inspirational." Shut up. However, he was correct. They were en route to the entrance exams for UA University. The starting point for their heroic careers. They both had the same objective in mind. To be the best hero. To rank first. They both boarded the train shortly after, and Melissa let her mind wander as the trip continued. But Bakugo quickly jolted Melissa out of her reverie. Bakugo said, "We're here, Blondie," in a quiet voice. Perplexed by Bakugo's tone, Melissa turned to face him. Was he anxious? "Yeah, this is the start of our journey, Katsuki. Don't worry, I know we'll both ace it," Melissa exclaimed, pumping her fist with excitement. Before charging forward with a fierce sense of resolve, he yelled, "Of course, I will. Are you underestimating me? Worry about keeping up and keeping your body in one piece, Blondie." She recognized the Bakugo. They started walking up the hill to UA after leaving the train station. Melissa whistled softly, amazed at the building's size. The building was just as impressive from halfway up the hill. When they reached the summit, they noticed a dark green-haired boy standing at the campus entrance, gazing admiringly at the building. When she heard Bakugo stop walking, she turned to face him, looking bewildered as he stood motionless, his mouth open, eyes wide, and shocked. With grave concern, she said, "Katsuki, are you okay?" Bakugo uttered a single word, his voice quivering. Deku. Bakugo caught Melissa's attention. Deku, like Izuku Midoriya, his deceased friend. The way Katsuki was acting as she had never seen him like this before made her question him and think it was a case of mistaken identity. She glanced at the boy who made Katsuki appear to have seen a real ghost. He definitely fits the description. Green hair, verify. Freckles, verify. Generally uninteresting, verify. However, how could this have happened? From a distance, they both observed Izuku ascending the stairs and entering UA. So he was also present for the test. In any case, they both arrived here with the same goals, even though Bakugo appeared to be too shaken to be in a suitable state to take an exam. She needed to jolt him out. Quick. She tried to get his attention by saying his name, Katsuki. No answer. Katsuki. She exclaimed more loudly. No joy yet, she yelled. Dynamite. As a few other incoming examinees turned their heads in perplexity, but she didn't care because Bakugo seemed to be startled out of his reverie by this one. We have to go, she stated firmly, because we have an exam to take. We can figure out whatever is going on later. He whispered, how is this possible? As I previously stated, it is irrelevant. At this point, passing this test is all that matters to us. This was it, Katsuki. He couldn't afford to lose focus at this moment. She said, now focus Katsuki. Bakugo gritted his teeth and steeled himself, not wanting to acknowledge that Blondie was correct. This was it, everything he had worked for up to this point. Bakugo said, let's go, and then he walked slowly into UA. Melissa gave him a worried look, but she followed anyway, recalling the discussion she and Bakugo had about a certain Izuku Midoriya. Rewind. Melissa joined Aldera 6 months later. Blondie, damn you, what the devil time will you use your quirk? Bakugo screamed, annoyed that Melissa was being reticent. I can't just yet, Bakugo, it's too dangerous. As she delivered another blow that missed its mark, she screamed in equal exasperation. Bakugo became even more irritated by her response and yelled at her, you think villains give a shit about risks? Damn it, you will never reach higher if you don't take them. If I have to, I'll make you do it. Bakugo was unrelenting, and just before she keeled over, she activated One for All in desperation. With this, he leapt over her, using an explosion to propel him into a front flip before landing, spinning, and firing an explosion into her back. Melissa yelled out in pain, but she didn't have time to recover as a barrage of small explosions violently peppered her body, causing her to scream. She had not come into contact with any solid objects, so the backlash didn't fully register, but when the dust settled, her right arm was severely bruised, her tracksuit arm was torn, and a tiny bit of blood leaked from her elbow. Red veins of energy appeared in her right arm, and with a wild swipe, a huge gust of wind blew both the explosions and Bakugo a fair distance down the beach. She clenched her teeth as tears threatened to spill out, grimacing at her arm before gasping and turning to face a startled Bakugo with concern. She rushed to him and started apologizing profusely. Bakugo, are you okay? I'm sorry, it's just. Bakugo snarled at her after waking up from his daze. For what in the world are you expressing regret? All that power, but you're just like Hima, he muttered, interrupting her with a shout before glancing down. He sat with his head in his arms, his angry face replaced by one of despair. Melissa decided it was time to question Bakugo about his past after noticing the significant change. Bakugo, who was he? Her voice was quiet as she asked. Bakugo's anger returned, and he glared at her. Blondie, it's none of your damn business. It is. Bakugo was caught off guard by the intensity of her voice as she retaliated, saying, you've been keeping something simmering away ever since I met you. I'm worried about you, my friend. Huh? Bakugo asked, raising an eyebrow. Who in hell claimed that we were friends? Melissa flinched at his caustic tone, but she pushed past it and took a seat beside him. All right, so we might not be friends, but at least you're my training partner. I can't have you fighting with me while you're carrying a burden. I'll ask again, who is he? Bakugo turned away, his rage fading again, and then he gave in. His name was Izuku Midoriya. Melissa listened without saying anything. Deku never listened, always chirping on about becoming a hero even though he was quirkless. It made me so mad at how he could still think he could become one despite being useless. But I always knew deep down, that if he had just a half-decent quirk he would have been a great hero, probably one of the best. He just had that about him. He was selfless and never cared about his own safety but always worrying about others, so that's where you're similar. Bakugo hesitated, as though gathering his thoughts, and then went on. The nerd would always be following me with that damn look in his eyes, talking about how amazing my quirk was. It pissed me off, I couldn't stand it. And I always thought he was looking down on me, so I bullied him. I tried to stop him from becoming a hero. I never got the chance to apologize before he died in a fire. They never even found his body. Melissa decided to speak up after he trailed off and became silent. I'm going to be honest with you, Bakugo. It sounded like you were a piece of shit, Melissa replied with firmness. Bakugo, who had never heard Melissa curse before, winced at her strong language. But her voice grew softer. Izuku seemed to have a lot of faith in you. Melissa looked straight at him and said, he would want you to be the best hero you can be, and he definitely wouldn't want you to beat yourself up over this. I have no doubt about it. So, Bakugo, get up. And proceed. For the sake of Izuku. She concluded her brief speech with conviction. Bakugo remained silent for a minute, gazing down thoughtfully. The word, Katsuki, he whispered. Have you said anything? She didn't hear what he said, so she asked in confusion. Bakugo jumped up and shouted, I said, call me Katsuki, damn it, don't make me say it again. Screw that, in fact, I'd be better known as Dynamite. Because the #1 hero will go by that name. You just observe. With a smile, Melissa looked up and saw that Bakugo was still not fully recovered, and he probably never would, but there was a fire in his eyes, one that she was happy to have helped light. She laughed before answering. You got it, Katsuki. This is Dynamite. End of flashback. Melissa knew she needed to follow her own advice, so she shook her head to get her thoughts straight. Focus. Don't get distracted. The other examinees filed in as President Mike took to the stage, cleared his throat, and projected his voice using his quirk, and she and Bakugo sat down in the auditorium, noticing Izuku sitting a few rows away, studying the handout diligently, seemingly unaware of their presence. They did their best to divert their attention. Hello to all of my new listeners for the entrance exam at UA University. Hey, everyone says. Quiet, everything is fine. A perfect response, that is. I'll dive right in and explain how the practical portion of this exam operates after we shake things up a bit. Be ready, indeed. Quiet. All of you listeners here will be participating in a 10-minute mock battle in an urban environment. The staff here at UA will guide you to your designated battle center. There are 3 different foe villains and the points are based on their level of difficulty. You are free to use your quirks however you wish to defeat them. It goes without saying that attacking any other examinees or any unheroic actions will immediate disqualification. A boy with blue hair and glasses leapt to his feet. I have a query, the boy announced. Go ahead, listener. The handout we were given depicts 4 villains, whereas you claimed there were 3. A misprint is unacceptable for the nation's most esteemed hero university. If Melissa hadn't been under so much stress and strain right now, the boy's stiff tone would have made her laugh. Yes, there is a 4th foe villain, but it is worth 0 points. Your best bet is to stay away from it, especially since it can cause a lot of chaos in confined spaces. Thank you for that, listener. 7111. Thank you for your clarification, the boy said, nodding. Before he sat down again, he said. I wish you luck. No worries, lifer. If you all look down at the cards in front of you, they will tell you which battle center you should go to next. Looking down, Bakugo saw that Melissa was in Center D and he was in Battle Center A. Bakugo turned to see that Izuku was on his way to Center G. Before they left to find a spot in UA, he gave Melissa one final glance. Izuku stood outside Battle Center G's gates, studying the competition. A few caught his attention. A tall boy with silver hair and many arms, a red-headed girl whose hands were growing and contracting, a boy with a crow's head, and a pink girl with pink hair and horns. The variety of peculiarities was astounding, but he had a job to do, and he knew that Nezu was watching. It was time to demonstrate his abilities, so he lowered his trusty goggles as the gate opened and heard President Mike yell. Get started. Izuku built the boogie pack and took off without thinking twice. He heard President Mike's voice calling out to the other examinees in the distance, but he ignored it as he sped through the city. He soon found himself facing a 2-pointer, and without hesitation, he threw the boogie pack's turbines straight at it, causing an explosion and destroying it on impact. He quickly disassembled the boogie pack and switched to the VBs. As soon as he hit the ground, he launched himself straight back into the air, did a front flip, and landed directly on a 1-pointer that was surrounded by 4 other robots. The shockwave he created with the stomp destroyed the other robots, giving him a good number of points. Seeing a stray three-pointer, he used the VB's hydraulic function, extending his leg and kicking the robot sideways, shattering it to pieces. When Izuku saw a lanky purple-haired examinee cornered by two three-pointers, he turned on the battering ram at the front and sped through the robots, saving the cowering examinee. Izuku grinned at being able to finally let loose and disassembled the VBs before switching to the ride. As he drove away, he noticed the boy frowning at him, but he ignored it. When Izuku saw another group of robots, he dismantled the ride and immediately constructed the BFS, tearing through the armor like paper and earning more and more points. Izuku gasped a little as he finished, pausing briefly to admire his creation before embarking on the ride again to earn more points. In the meantime, the UA staff was observing the examinees' performance in the observation room. "The crop of this year's students looks quite promising," a woman's voice said. With a nod of agreement, Nezu gave his evaluation. Indeed, from raw combat skill, they focused on Battle Center A, where a blonde with spiky hair sat smoking in his palms atop a pile of demolished robots. To creative innovation, in Battle Center C's feed, a boy with a rock-like face ordered birds to divert the robot's attention while he pushed buttons to turn them off. And a high amount of adaptability. At last, the scene shifted to Battle Center G, where a boy with green hair was quickly cycling through a variety of machines constructed from his body to eliminate the robots. Toshinori Yagi stood quietly to the side of the room, his gaze never leaving the feed showing Battle Center D. His successor's performance had been, at best, mediocre thus far. She had managed to score a few points, but not nearly enough to earn her a spot at the UA, and time was running out. However, I believe that it's about time we unleashed the real test. Pressing the red button in front of him, Nezu grinned. Melissa was still a relative novice with the quirk, having only activated it a few times despite being possessed one for all for nearly 3 years. This was primarily precautionary, of course, as her body was not prepared to handle the full force of the quirk when she was selected as the successor, only maturing into a vessel that could handle it to a certain extent in the last few months. Additionally, All Might was a terrible teacher. Great hero, but terrible teacher. To combat this, they both agreed that she would not use one for all consistently until she entered UA. As a result, she was only able to control the output on various individual limbs to a certain extent, but this control was inconsistent, and she was vulnerable to injury if she made even a small mistake. As a result, she had to focus intensely before attempting to attack even one robot. Though her quick thinking abilities, surprising athleticism, and non-quirk hand-to-hand combat skills were helpful, they were insufficient to fully overcome the limitations of her quirk's slow and ineffective activation. Unfortunately for Melissa, time was running out. 2 minutes remain. Melissa winced at the warning, knowing deep down that she had not earned enough points, and that warning had further damaged her confidence. Slowly, she heard a rumbling noise and looked up at the massive zero-pointer tearing through buildings and heading for the examinees, stunned by the madness UA had unleashed on the battle center, and she and the other examinees began to run away. She heard a tiny voice and noticed a brown-haired girl with her ankle stuck beneath a big piece of debris that had been thrown from a building. Melissa immediately ran over to the girl and tried to lift the debris, but the weight was a major obstacle. The girl gave her a terrified look as she looked up at her. "Leave this place. The robot is on its way." Desperately, the girl objected. "I'll get you out of here, no matter what." Doing her best to block out the sound of the rumbling growing louder, Melissa responded defiantly. She was unable to move the heavy rock that was currently holding the girl down, though, and the zero-pointer continued to approach. Melissa realized she needed to stop the zero-pointer after looking up. She hardly had control over one for all, but it was all or nothing, now or never, to save this girl, and attempting to scale the output would take too long and crush them both. The girl gasped and stared in wonder as Melissa vanished in a flash and flew towards the zero-pointer, but she gritted her teeth, charged up one for all into both of her legs, and launched herself into the air in a streak of turquoise energy. Melissa drew inspiration from her Uncle Might for the first time as she wound up a punch, clenching every muscle in her body and using one for all in her right arm. "Detroit, SMASHHHH, she shouted. As soon as her fist touched the zero-pointer's face, it instantly caved in, causing the entire body to groan, lean back, and begin to implode. Although the pain hadn't registered because of the adrenaline, she was certain that her legs were as broken as her right arm, which flopped uselessly at her side as she fell. She had stopped it and saved the girl below, but at what cost? As she fell, exhaustion took over, and she felt a slap on her cheek just before her vision went black and she hit the ground. Breathing heavily, Izuku disassembled his smack hands. He had been building and disassembling quickly while earning points, which had taken a toll on his body. Present Mike had announced that there were 2 minutes remaining, but he was sure of the number of points he had gained when he heard a rumbling sound as a shadow passed over the battle center, the zero-pointer. As the zero-pointer charged towards the examinees, tearing through buildings, Izuku knew he could run like the others, but he wanted to stop the zero-pointer from causing any more destruction. This was his chance to challenge himself. He wouldn't get another opportunity like this to show what he could really do. Thinking quickly, Izuku tried to construct the ride so he could speed over and face the giant, but his lower legs bulged but refused to fully form into the build, causing a sharp pain. Shocked, but without time to think, he chose a different approach, and he made a smack hand out of his left hand, winced at the pain that came from it, reached out and grabbed a building, stepped back, and used the smack hand's power to one-hand slingshot himself towards the zero-pointer, landing just in front of it. Izuku disassembled his smack hand and attempted to use the BFS to carve the zero-pointer to pieces, but this time his arm developed a dull green circuitry pattern that quickly faded as his body flat-out refused. Izuku quickly realized that this was his limit. He had overworked his nanites for the first time, so this was his limit. In any case, the zero-pointer was still a machine, and he could talk to it. As the zero-pointer locked in on him, it lowered its arm while he raised his palms. The moment he made contact, a bright green flash appeared, and a green circuitry pattern rose up and covered the entire zero-pointer before it abruptly shut down and froze in place. Reeled from the pounding headache of pushing so far beyond his limits for the day, Izuku staggered backwards, sat down, and grinned. The exam was over. He turned to look behind him and saw a small elderly woman with a cane walking around the center, giving first aid by kissing the more injured examinees. He approached her and silently raised his hand to show that he was okay, and she nodded, letting him catch his breath. After a few minutes, Izuku got up and headed for the exit. As examinees began filing out, Bakugo was making his way from the examination center to the front of UA. He crossed his arms and waited at the gate, anticipating Blondie's arrival. Time seemed to stop as a head of green hair strode by him while he waited. Deku. If Izuku heard him, he didn't register a response when he called for the boy, which was really strange. Bakugo scowled as he marched after him and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Hey Deku, did you not hear me when I spoke to you?" His growl was a mix of confusion and rage. Bakugo's breath caught as he stared at Izuku, who was spinning around with a perplexed expression. "Who is Deku? I believe you have me confused with someone else. Izuku Midoriya is my name, but it's good to meet you." "You damn nerd, I know what your name is." The harsh tone of the boy surprised Izuku. "Why in the world are you here? Furthermore, where in hell have you been? I don't think we've met before, but I'm here to take the exam just like everyone else." "Have you never met before? Have you gone completely insane? Before you, we spent 14 years growing up together." Bakugo was unable to complete his sentence, and his voice trailed off. Izuku realized that this might have been someone who knew him, someone who had previously known who he was. Izuku didn't want to dwell on the past, though, and based on the way the boy spoke to him, it didn't seem like a part of his past he wanted to confront at the moment. He sighed and chose to explain himself. "Look, I'm really sorry, but for the past 4 years of my life I've been suffering from amnesia. I've got no recollection of anything prior to that," Izuku said with a smile. Bakugo gazed at him in disbelief. He had amnesia. Moreover, it coincided exactly with his death. If the entire situation wasn't bizarre before, it was now downright insane. "Now if you'll excuse me, I'm super tired and I want nothing more than to go home and sleep," Izuku said as he started to leave after shrugging Bakugo's hand off his shoulder. "I hope to see you at the start of university. Then, we can discuss this further. Hopefully. Are you even aware of who you are speaking to? What do you mean by the start date of university? Damn it, you have no peculiarities. You couldn't possibly have passed." Bakugo's tone was filled with incredulity. Izuku's display of confidence totally confused him. "Oh yeah. About that. Well, like I said, I'll be more than happy to talk if you get into UA." Izuku replied with a smile. After saying, "I guess I'll see you around," he waved Bakugo away and walked away. Bakugo was stunned, staring as Izuku turned and left him. and he had no idea how long he had been motionless until his name was called from behind him. Katsuki. Slowly, Bakugo turned to see Melissa, whose right arm was in a sling and a cast, running toward him. She approached him with a serious expression on her face and asked her question without holding back. "I saw who you were talking to. What was said by him?" With concern, she inquired. "Something about amnesia caused him to forget me. What the devil is happening today? What on earth happened to you?" Bakugo attempted to change the topic in an effort to hide how he really felt about the interaction. As she answered, Melissa rubbed the back of her head sheepishly. "Oh I lost control of my quirk trying to save someone and I'm sorry about whatever it is that happened with Izuku." "Why in the world are you saying you're sorry? You're not at all to blame. Besides, based on his speech pattern, we'll have plenty of time to talk about where the hell he's been once university starts," Bakugo said, appearing to be more focused than before. "Oh, indeed. How was your exam performance?" Melissa inquired. Bakugo's smirk returned with assurance. "Flawless victory, of course," was his haughty response. "That's fantastic." She trailed off, disappointed in herself and the possibility that she had let All Might down. "I'm not sure I did so well," Bakugo said nonchalantly. "It's only natural that if you're going to compare your results to mine they're going to look shit." Melissa sneered at his conceit. "The UA would be stupid to reject someone like you," he added. "Buddha, just don't get arrogant." His attempt to lift her spirits made Melissa smile. "Thanks, Katsuki. This is dynamite." Izuku was sitting in his room at the facility, idly bouncing a tennis ball off the wall and catching it, a week after the entrance exam. When he heard a bell, he knew someone was at his door and hurried to answer it. One of the facility employees was smiling when the door opened. She gave him a small envelope stamped with the UA logo and said, "Hello there, Midoriya, I hope you're well. I do believe this is for you." With a smile of his own, Izuku replied, "Thank you, Seiki." Izuku was left alone with his letter after Seiki nodded and walked away. As he looked down at the letter, he felt anxious even though he was sure he did well. Refusing to linger, he tore it open, and a tiny disc dropped out. A holographic projection began as soon as the disc struck the ground, and Principal Nezu's image appeared to greet Izuku. "Hello, Midoriya, I hope all is well with you. I would like to thank you for taking the UA entrance exam. First of all, you cleared the written section of the test with flying colors, which allowed you to enroll in UA General Education. Now, for the outcome you have been anticipating, the practical exam. Not only did you earn 60 hero points in the practical, which is a good enough score on its own to get you into the hero course, but you also earned an extra 40 rescue points for saving other examinees and turning off the zero-pointer during the test, according to a more thorough analysis of your performance. This raises your exam score to 100 points, and I'm happy to say that you not only meet the requirements for the UA Hero course, but you also won first place in the practical section. Young Midoriya, you keep exceeding my expectations, and I'm excited to watch the kind of hero you grow into. We will take care of moving you into your dorms, so please send all of your belongings to UA University. We also ask that you report to your homeroom first thing on your first day so that you can meet your classmates and your new homeroom teacher. Welcome to UA University Izuku Midoriya." The examination's results, which included the top 10 scorers, were displayed as the projection came to a stop. 1 hero points, 60 rescue points, 40 total, 100 name, Izuku Midoriya. 2 hero points, 95 rescue points, 0 total, 95 name, Katsuki Bakugo. 3 hero points, 45 rescue points, 35 total, 80 name, Ajiro Kirishima. 4 hero points, 30 rescue points, 45 total, 75 name, Ochako Uraraka. Hero points, 37 rescue points, 35 total, 72.5 name, Abara Shizozuki. 6 Melissa Shield Hero, 15 rescue points, 55 hero points, 70 total. 7 name, Tenya Ida rescue points, 10 total, 65 hero points, 55. 8 name, hero points, 30 rescue points, 30 total, 60 Itsuka Kendo. 9 name, hero points, 50 rescue points, 8 total, 58 hero points, Tetsu Tetsu. 10 hero points, 45 rescue points, 10 name, Fumikage Tokiyami, Total, 55. First position. Amazing, but he had to avoid becoming overconfident. He glanced at the following name. Bakugo Katsuki, an examinee whose combat skill alone nearly equaled his total. Like everyone else who was accepted into the UA Hero course, he was confident that he would be strong and talented. He needed to remain alert. That much was certain. A grin began to appear on his face. He could rejoice, at least for the moment. At the moment, Melissa was residing in the apartment that her father had rented for her. But she was depressed about how she did on the test. She was positive that her point total was insufficient. Heck, she had heard the brown-haired girl and the blue-haired boy announce their total points aloud after she had passed them on the test. Both greatly exceeded the sum she ultimately obtained. Simply put, she couldn't qualify logistically. Perhaps she wasn't destined to be a hero after all, even though the number one hero picked her. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door, so she went to answer it. The postman was the one. "Letter here for Melissa Shield," she said. "That's me, thank you," and shut the door. Melissa swallowed as she gazed down at the UA seal, then slowly opened the letter and removed the disc. All Might materialized as a projection emerged. "Hello, Melissa, I apologize for the wait. Grading the entrance exam and hero work are very demanding. Let's get right to your entrance exam results. First off, you passed the written section, which means you can study general education at UA. Well accomplished. Let's talk about how you did in the practical section. Sadly, your total score of 15 points would not be nearly sufficient to earn you a spot in the hero course." Melissa bowed her head. She was aware that she had failed All Might. But take a look at this. Melissa awoke and glanced at the projection switch's feed, which showed the brown-haired girl she had tried to save before she was compelled to destroy the zero-pointer. Present mic was being used by the girl to beg. That blonde girl could have used that time to score more points instead of wasting it trying to save me. Is there any way I could give her some of my points for risking everything, including her life, to save me? Present Mike responded, "No need to worry, little listener, we've got everything under control. I'm sure she did just fine," and smiled at the girl. What kind of hero university would we be, young Melissa, if we turned away people who exhibit the true qualities of a hero? Your self-sacrifice earned you a total of 55 rescue points, which puts your total at 70, making you eligible for the UA Hero course and ranking in the top 10 for exam results. That is the essence of a true hero. The capacity to motivate others to take action through one's own actions. On the first day, please report to your homeroom first thing to greet your homeroom teacher and your peers. Welcome, young Melissa. This is your Hero Academia. Please send us all of your belongings so we can handle the moving process. Melissa was so relieved that she couldn't help but cry from sheer happiness. She had been waiting for this moment for so long. But this was only the beginning. When she looked at the top 10, she could not afford to be complacent because each of them had gained a lot more hero points than she had, which meant that they were much more skilled at their quirks than she was, with Katsuki Bakugo in second place being a clear example of this. But she kept her eyes on the top spot. Izuku Midoriya. Didn't Bakugo say he was quirkless? How could he have gotten such a high score? One thing was certain. UA was going to be anything but boring. She had a lot of questions, from the green-haired mystery to the warning about rescue points. A tiny smile appeared on her face. She was impatient. There was a sense of tension as Melissa and Bakugo walked home in silence on the last day of Aldera High School, having both received multiple congratulations from their peers and teachers. Bakugo broke the silence with a low voice, saying, "You saw the top 10. She knew exactly what he was talking about, so there was no point in pretending to be ignorant. Let's get right to the point. After giving it a sidelong glance, Melissa answered, "Yeah. But you said he was quirkless. I don't mean to come across as impolite, but given the structure of the test, it shouldn't have been feasible for someone without a peculiarity to earn that many hero points." Bakugo gritted his teeth and said, "Yeah, but the way he spoke when I saw him. I need answers," with more frustration than anger in his voice. How on earth could that have occurred? Melissa gave a solemn nod, but she remained silent, and the two continued to talk. They soon separated and arrived at their homes, both of them aware that their only option at this time was to get ready for UA. Izuku Midoriya had said goodbye to the facility staff and was heading to his first day at UA University. He entered the campus and wandered through the halls looking for the Class 1A, to which he was assigned. When he finally found the sign, he saw that it was above the largest doorway he had ever seen. The holidays flew by, and the new academic year began. A new horizon for aspiring hero students, ready to begin their journey. He was met with shouting as soon as he entered the room. "Get your feet off that desk immediately. You are dishonoring the alumni of this outstanding university as well as our forebears." When he looked over at the boy he was reprimanding, he noticed that it was the blonde boy who had called him Deku. It was the boy who had stood up during the exam, his arms flailing wildly as he spoke. "Huh?" the blonde asked, squinting his eyes. "4 eyes, who the devil are you supposed to be?" Crudely, he asked. "Tenya Ida from Somei Private Academy is who I am. This disrespect for UA University is unacceptable, and I will not stand by and allow it to continue." The blonde's casual demeanor appeared to be further agitating the boy known as Ida. "Somebody, huh, you're a posh fucker, then. How about this, 4 eyes? Leave my face now before I blow you up." Wow, the blonde was just as crude as ever. Ida echoed his thoughts, glancing at the blonde in surprise before continuing. "Wow me, are you certain that the hero course is the right place for you? Additionally, your language is extremely rude." Izuku's eyes met the blonde's as he walked into the class, trying to keep a low profile. The boy scowled at him, narrowed his eyes, and said nothing before returning his focus to Ida, who was still reprimanding him. Since the boy didn't seem to be the type to keep his mouth shut, he assumed that they had known each other in the past, but what exactly did he have against him? He would probably find out soon. He sat down and glanced around at the people in the room. He had seen the girl in pink, the boy with the crow's head, and the boy with several arms during the exam. A boy with rock-like features, a tall girl with a spiky black ponytail, a girl with green hair tied in a bow with her tongue protruding from the side of her mouth, and finally a heterochromatic boy with half red and half white hair, a chilly expression on his face, and a red scar around his blue eye on his left side, sat at the back of the class, cut off from the others. Students continued to file in slowly until the class was nearly full. Izuku was taken aback when a blonde girl with vivid aqua eyes abruptly entered the room. She was stunning. He gazed as she confidently strode over to the blonde with the spiky hair. "Katsuki, just because it's the first day, stop making trouble," she reprimanded him. Oh, so they knew each other. Did he know her? No, of course, it was amnesia, but did she know him before? He hoped so. In any case, based on their interactions, she and the person known as Katsuki were clearly close. Was he her boyfriend? That would be very disappointing. He was here to be a hero, not to find love, but who said he couldn't do both? No, Hero University. Focus Izuku. He shook his head free from these thoughts and tried to concentrate. He looked up to see that they were both staring at him, the blonde looking angry, but her expression was more curious. Alright, something was definitely up. Well, they would be seeing each other more. He had time. "Oh, it's you, the girl with the blonde hair. You entered. You delivered a fantastic punch." Izuku looked at the vivacious voice coming from the doorway and noticed a girl with brown hair and a permanent flush on her cheeks. She began to talk to the brunette, but a weary voice interrupted her as the blonde grinned and sheepishly rubbed the back of her head. "If you're here to make friends, then get out." Everyone's attention was drawn to the yellow caterpillar in the front of the classroom as a result. A weary, disheveled man with shaggy black hair and a loose-fitting black outfit emerged with a juice box as the caterpillar stood up. "It took you all 10 seconds to be quiet," the man continued in his slack voice. "It just does not make sense to waste this much time. This year, I, Shota Aizawa, will be teaching your homeroom." He drank from his juice box and peered over the class with a sharp gaze, then reached into the sleeping bag and took out a sports uniform. "The suitcases beneath your desk contain these gym uniforms. After putting them on, go to the field. Don't make me wait," he commanded. The class was stunned when the man walked out, but they quickly got over their initial reaction and obeyed his orders. Following their change, Melissa spoke softly to Bakugo as they made their way to the field. "So, he is indeed present. How will you respond?" Curious, she asked. "What? I don't have time for such nonsense. Stop talking and concentrate, Blondie," he retorted abruptly. Melissa understood her friend's meaning, which was that it was a topic for later, not now, and they needed to focus on whatever their enigmatic teacher had in store. "It took you all far too long," said the teacher, who was waiting for them with a very impatient expression on his face, as the last student arrived. "Time is of the essence for future heroes. Okay, let's get started right away by doing a quirk apprehension test." A peculiar test of apprehension. The class echoed. The first person to object to their new teacher was the brown-haired girl who had introduced herself to Melissa as Ochako Uraraka. But it's the first day, Mr. Aizawa. How about the ceremony of induction? Time is everything, and you don't have time for such leisurely activities, Aizawa replied, rolling his eyes. The adaptability of UA University's traditions is the foundation of its popularity. There is no exception to the way the teachers conduct their classes. Since middle school, you ought to have been administering these physical fitness exams. With the exception of being permitted to use your peculiarities, you will be performing the same tasks here. Now, Midoriya. Izuku became alert as everyone in the class, except for two blondes, gave him a questioning look. Aizawa went on, "What was your record for a softball throw in middle school?" This statement caused some of the students to look shocked. "You finished top of the practical exam." With trepidation, Izuku stumbled, I don't remember, sir." Aizawa gave him a suspicious look and went on. "Well, I suppose it doesn't matter. Try using your quirk to do it now. As long as you stay in the circle, you are free to do anything you want." Izuku nodded uneasily, then walked forward and took the ball from Aizawa, feeling the class's eyes on him as he walked slowly to the circle, set the ball just outside of it behind him, and then covered his eyes with his trusty goggles. "I am capable of being a hero." His nerves vanished in an instant. Before he constructed the slam cannon, he activated his nanites, and the green circuitry briefly appeared up his right arm. The slam cannon's maw reached behind him and snatched up a big piece of the ground, including the ball. Melissa and Bakugo exchanged wide-eyed glances as their jaws fell. Izuku was certainly not a strange person. Bakugo muttered a growl and suppressed the overwhelming impulse to rush in and demand answers right away, knowing that would not resolve the situation. Instead, he would wait until it was all over and make Deku give the answers. Izuku took a final deep breath and took aim at a precise angle to maximize the distance, feeling as though he could see more clearly than ever before, despite the green tint to his vision. Bang! When the shot was fired, the concrete ball that held the softball ball shot through the air at amazing speeds. Aizawa demonstrated the displayed distance to the class by holding up the phone. 1,608.4 meters. After surveying the class, Aizawa said, "Know your maximum first. That's the most sensible basis for a hero. This seems like a lot of fun." The pink girl cried out. "We can do whatever we want with our peculiarities. I love the hero course." This was said by a boy whose elbows looked odd. "Looks like fun." Their festivities were interrupted by Aizawa's voice. "You all have 3 years to become heroes, and you're talking about having fun. Does it sound like fun to have natural disasters, villain attacks, injuries, and death?" The class listened in silence and shock as he discussed the weighty implications, and Aizawa gave them a spooky smile before continuing. "How about I have a little fun with you?" The class froze in response to his threat. Whoever finishes last in this test will be considered to have no potential and will be expelled from the hero course. Aizawa's smile got even bigger when they changed their mind. "Welcome to the UA University Hero Course. 50-meter dash." Ida and a green-haired girl were the first pair called up, and the countdown began with a robotic voice. 3, 2, 1. As he surged over the finish line, Ida turned on the Cav's rear engines, which roared. 2.98 seconds. "I couldn't accelerate past third gear," Ida said to himself as he looked down in self-analysis. However, a satisfactory outcome. The 50-meter course was completed in 2 swift hops by the frog girl using her skills. 5.29 seconds. "Ribbit," she croaked, revealing that her quirk was what made her resemble a frog. Uraraka and Melissa then formed a line. 3, 2, 1. After touching her garments to activate her quirk and make them weightless, Uraraka ran as quickly as she could. 7.02 seconds. "Not bad," Uraraka uttered under his breath. Melissa, however, appeared to be in focus as she delayed for about 4 seconds at the beginning, then hopped off the mark to about halfway, then repeated the process, falling just short of the finish line and having to run past it. 8.15 seconds. Melissa's inefficiencies persisted as she sighed and looked down. The class proceeded with the 50-meter dash, showcasing their individual modes of mobility, such as the blonde launching a laser from his stomach, the pink girl sliding on a transparent liquid, and the half-haired boy sliding on a wave of ice he made. When Bakugo and Midoriya finally stepped up, the two boys looked at one another and then only at the finish line. The tension was evident, and Izuku lowered his goggles as Bakugo's palms popped. 3, 2, 1. As he crossed the finish line, Izuku quickly constructed the ride and smoothly pushed the handlebars forward, accelerating and stopping smoothly. 3.11 seconds. Turbo blast speed. Bakugo sped off the start line and nearly took off for the finish. 3.94 seconds. When Bakugo crossed the line, he appeared to be thinking deeply as he glanced down at his palms. Izuku gave Bakugo a smile and spoke louder to him. But instead of receiving a positive response to Izuku's compliment, Bakugo turned to Izuku and scowled before stumbling off to the next test. Nice race, that quirk of yours is amazing. Before doing the same, Izuku's smile vanished. With a worried expression on her face, Melissa simply observed them both from a distance. Strength of grip. Melissa felt it begin to activate as she tried to channel one for all to a safe degree in her arms, but as she squeezed the grip machine, her control failed and it petered out. She looked at her score on the screen, disappointed. 50.0 kilograms. Whoa, dude, 580 kilogram. Are you some sort of octopus? She turned to see the tall boy with silver hair, a mask, and several arms being yelled at in disbelief by a little boy with purple balls on his head. Crunch. The sound of metal breaking soon caught her attention, and she saw Izuku Midoriya standing with his smack hands pressed together, small pieces of metal from the wrecked grip machine falling to the ground as he opened them. With anxiety, he turned to Aizawa and disassembled the smack hands. Mr. Aizawa, I think I broke the Machinia. It's fine Midoriya, continue to the next test, said Aizawa in his ever-weary voice. Aizawa took a replacement machine from a bag and gave it to Momo Yaoyorozu, the girl with the ponytail, who was standing there holding a portable vice clamp she had made. Long jump standing. The frog-like girl, the boy with the stomach laser, and Bakugo all cleared the sandbox with their peculiarities. Knowing that distance was not a concern, Izuku stepped up and activated the VBs, aiming for as high as he could go while clearing the sandbox at the same time. Izuku took in the view of the UA campus while in the air, and as he descended, he disassembled the VBs so as not to cause catastrophic destruction with his landing. He constructed the boogie pack just before he landed, using it to hover harmlessly to the ground, then disassembling it and walking away. A blond boy with black lightning in his hair muttered, "Show offa." Melissa got up and tried to use one for all again, and as the power surged through her calves, she jumped and landed inside the box, barely avoiding it. She let out another groan of exasperation and turned to leave. Run a distance. This section tested the students' endurance, with Mineta and an invisible girl named Hagakuri stopping, and Melissa becoming the third person unable to continue. Bakugo, on the other hand, finished fourth behind the half-and-half boy, Shoto Todoroki, Yaoyorozu, and Izuku, both of whom were asked to stop by Aizawa while Izuku was riding the ride at leisure and Yaoyorozu was riding an electric bicycle that she had made. The repeated side steps only yielded one remarkable outcome, a boy named Minoru Mineta, who used the purple balls on his head to bounce rapidly from side to side. The sit-ups and seated toe touch were fairly simple. Throwing a ball, Bakugo took the initiative and threw the ball with great force. 804.2 meters. TCH, he scowled again and hurried away. Uraraka completely eliminated the ball's gravity, causing the screen to display the infinity sign, while Momo Yaoyorozu, armed with a cannon, produced a result of 2,000 meters. At last, Melissa took the initiative, knowing that she would eventually have to deliver an extraordinary outcome or face expulsion. It was now or never, no matter what happened to her. She threw with all her strength, preparing herself for the excruciating pain of the backlash. Her arm felt normal, the ball fell harmlessly, and her score appeared. 48 meters. She was shell-shocked because she was certain that she had used her arm's full one for all power. She was dragged out of the circle by a gray cloth that suddenly appeared, bound around her, and spun her around so that she was facing Aizawa, who had red eyes. Those goggles and the scarf made Izuku gasp. Eraserhead. Erasure hero. The class turned to him because of his outburst. A confused-looking boy with red hair said, "Eraserhead. I've never heard of him." The others gazed at Aizawa in awe as Izuku explained, "He's an underground hero, prefers to stay away from the limelight. His quirk allows him to erase the quirks of others just by looking at them." Although the restraints were flexible, Melissa found that they felt like steel against her skin despite her best efforts to resist. That entrance exam was not rational as it allowed someone like you to enter the hero course, Aizawa said as he began his lecture. You nearly died and became incapacitated as a result of the things you did to earn your rescue points. A dead hero is the most useless. Do you really believe you can save others when you will make it impossible for yourself to be saved? I have been closely monitoring your performance and outcomes today. You have a strong quirk, but it's disgusting how out of control you are. Unlocking the entire extent is the only way to swiftly activate it. Only by mutilating your body can you fully unleash its potential. In the world of heroics, you would be far more of a liability than a help. Do you think that in order to make up for your shortcomings with your quirk control, you will simply hurt yourself and become helpless? The incapacity to move accentuated Aizawa's piercing gaze, which seemed to be disgusted at her, and every word was scathing. As you stand right now, Melissa Shield. Before turning away with a dismissive sneer, Aizawa said, "You have another chance. You have no potential. Get it over with quickly." He released Melissa, turned off his quirk, and took a step back, giving himself some eye drops. She was aware that Aizawa was correct. Her quirk was detrimental and worse than useless in her current state. There were no justifications. She needed to figure out how to get better and achieve a remarkable outcome immediately. She knew she would still have to use one for all at 100% since she couldn't swiftly activate a safe percentage in her arm and keep it there long enough to be useful. However, how could she accomplish this without becoming incapacitated? She had an idea. It was simple enough to get one for all to activate in specific body parts. Therefore, why not simply reduce the damage? As the others watched, she drew her arm back and was ready to throw, bringing it forward and letting loose the full power of one for all in the tip of her finger. A gust of wind was created by the ball's backlash as it shot skyward. She clutched her purple finger and glanced back at Aizawa. "Sir, how was that?" Her eyes were burning with conviction as she spoke. "Satisfactory," was his straightforward response. Aizawa was impressed by the innovation, though, and his broad smile betrayed his feelings as he glanced down at the outcome on the screen. 804.3 meters. Melissa smiled back. She had a breakthrough at that moment. One for all was quicker to activate and dealt less damage when used in a smaller area, and it felt a little easier to control when it was restricted to just her finger. The power didn't overflow her as it usually did, even when it was used at 100% and caused damage. She was certain that she would rewrite her quirk's usage, beginning with her fingers, though it would take some practice. Uraraka welcomed Melissa as she made her way back to the group. "Melissa, are you okay?" the brown-haired girl asked, giving her a worried look. "Although your finger appears to be in poor condition, that throw was incredible." "I'll be all right, Uraraka, I'm capable of handling anything," Melissa bravely responded, trying to ignore the pain. "I'll get it checked out in the nurse's office later." To attract their attention, Aizawa cleared his throat. Aizawa declared, "Okay class, these are your results," and displayed a list to the class as a whole from the device he was holding. 1. Yaoyorozu Momo. 2. Midoriya Izuku. 3. Todoroki Shoto. 4. Bakugo Katsuki. 5. Ida Tenya. 6. Tokiyami Fumikage. 7. Shoji Mezzo. 8. Kirishima Ejiro. 9. Ashido Mina. 10. Uraraka Ochako. 11. Kota Koji. 12. Sato Rikido. 13. Asui Suyu. 14. Aoyama Yuga. 15. Siro Honta. 16. Kaminari Denki. 17. Jiro Kyoka. 18. Melissa Shield. 19. Hagakure Toru. 20. Mineta Minoru. Melissa dejectedly looked down again. She had to do much better and quickly. Sure, she hadn't finished last and was safe, but a bottom 3 finish wasn't appropriate for the successor of All Might and someone who wanted to be the #1 hero. Bakugo, on the other hand, was quietly furious because, in addition to being 4th, he had rank behind Deku with his bullshit new quirk, meaning that, not only had he returned from the dead after all these years, but he had a new quirk that allowed him to outrank him twice. If he could avoid blowing the nerd up himself, he had a choice of words for him. Mineta, however, appeared utterly distressed, his aspirations to become a hero in order to win the lady's approval fading before his very eyes. "I lied about the expulsion, by the way, and nobody is returning home. It was just a logical trick to make sure you all gave it your best effort," Aizawa declared. "What?" everyone in the class echoed. Momo Yaoyorozu proudly shared her deduction with the class. Of course, it was obvious from the start, there was no chance he would have actually followed through with such a threat. The blonde boy, Denki Kaminari, muttered under his breath, "Easy for you to say at the top of the lista." He yelled in pain as an earphone jack suddenly poked him in the arm, and he turned to see Kyoka Jiro, the girl, twirling her other earphone jack naively, and he just sighed. "With that wrapped Upa shield. Melissa gave Aizawa a hopeful glance. After giving her a piece of paper and saying, "Take this note to the old lady and get your finger checked out," he turned to face the other students. "We're done for the day, everyone. Please go to Heights Alliance Dorm A and settle in." "Yes, Mr. Aizawa." All Might, wearing a bright yellow suit, came up to the homeroom teacher as the class dispersed. "You lie, Aizawa. Last year, your entire class was expelled." Aizawa answered casually, closing his eyes. It was decided that they had no potential. This class is not like the others. "Well, I hope now you can see the potential within young Melissa." Aizawa gave him a wary look. "You seem to be really attracted to her." With a note of menace in his voice, Aizawa remarked, "I hope there isn't any bias because she is the daughter of your former sidekick All Might." "Obviously not. I just wanted to make it clear that even though she might not have met UA standards in the practical exam, she definitely has what it takes to be a truly successful hero." "All Might, we'll take care of that. Ultimately, it is my responsibility and consequently yours to develop them into said heroes over the course of the following 3 years. Giving them a break won't benefit them in the real world," Aizawa retorted. All Might gave a silent nod of agreement. The hero Smintos welcomed the Class 1A students as they arrived at Heights Alliance. "Hello, Class 1A. I'm Smintos, and I'll be teaching you modern literature this year." He then led them into the building and the tour began. Class 1A was in awe as they entered the spacious living area. "Today, I will be showing you around your new living space. The communal kitchen is located in this area. The communal restrooms and laundry are located down the hall. The dorm rooms are located from the 2nd to the 5th floor. The male dorms are on the left, and the female dorms are on the right. In addition to the standard amenities like beds and closets, each room has its own air conditioning, toilet, refrigerator, and balcony. Your belongings have already been moved into the designated rooms by us. I'll now give your keys to each of you and let you settle in. I hope your journey to become a pro hero is enjoyable and welcome to UA." The more gregarious students, like Hagakure, Uraraka, Ashido, Hiroshima, and Kaminari, stayed in the common area to get to know their new classmates, while Tokiyami, Shoji, Koda, and Todoroki went to their rooms to unpack their things or just spend some alone time. Smintos then distributed the keys and the students scattered. Bakugo was standing there, frowning but not necessarily angry, when Izuku felt a firm hand on his shoulder just as he was ready to leave for his room. He spoke softly, gesturing with a thumb to the door. "Hey, we will speak now." Izuku let out a sigh, but he couldn't refuse the boy because he had promised him a conversation on exam day. This was it. Izuku nodded, and the two left the building, with a few of their classmates glancing at them, but none of them appeared as worried as Melissa. Melissa excused herself from Uraraka's conversation and followed the two, having to do so to ensure that nothing went wrong, even though she knew it was a private matter between them. Izuku and Bakugo were walking in silence for a while, neither of them initiating the conversation. To be honest, Izuku wasn't expecting this. Based on what he had seen of the boy thus far, his brazen and coarse demeanor would have indicated that he would have begun yelling as soon as possible. However, Bakugo simply kept walking in front of him, which made Izuku a little uneasy. Izuku decided to break the silence and spoke up. Izuku began, "So what did you want to talk about?" Bakugo interrupted Izuku without turning to face him, asking, "What happened?" "What are you saying?" Izuku asked. Bakugo turned, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "Deku, stop the nonsense. How did you fare 4 years ago? You went where? Why are you unable to recall anything?" Izuku cast a downward glance. Silently, I can't say," he answered. "You're unable to say? I thought you were dead, Deku." "Damn it, all of us did. Did you know that your mother has also passed away? But you're here pretending that nothing took place. You have no idea how much I've endured over the past 4 years." Bakugo's tirade was passionate. Izuku gazed at the boy in disbelief. He was obviously in pain, and while he believed he had no friends or family, there was a person directly in front of him who was obviously very upset about his disappearance. Izuku began to thoughtfully respond. "I do know my mom died as someone told me a while back. It hurts, yes, but with me getting amnesia, all my emotions connected to my first 14 years of life are just not there, so no, I don't know what I've put you through, Bakugo." Bakugo recoiled when Izuku called him by his real name instead of his nickname, Kachan, and he was even more shocked when Izuku spoke while looking him in the eyes. "So, help me to understand, so that I can make things right." Bakugo's ire was somewhat rekindled by this response. There you go once more. On your virtuous nonsense. Damn it, you've gotten worse than you were when you were quirkless. And where in the world did you get this new power of yours? Quirks don't come in after mysteriously disappearing at 14 years old, last time I checked. Bakugo's voice was suspicious this time. Izuku trailed off uneasily again. I can't say anything on that either, I made a promise. Bakugo sneered, you promised. Are you now keeping secrets, then? He could tell that Izuku would not back down on this, so he reluctantly chose to end the argument. Why am I not surprised, Deku? Why do you call me that so often? Izuku posed a direct question. What? Izuku's tone startled Bakugo, who blinked. Deku. That's what you keep calling me. Why? Izuku inquired again. It's what I used to call you growing Upa, it's a play on your name, it means useless. Bakugo's voice trailed off as he spoke, this time about his name. Useless. Izuku furrowed his brow. He signaled for Bakugo to go into further detail. Yes, that brings me to the reason I brought you here. I used to be annoyed by your eccentricity and desire to be a hero when we were younger. I tried to get you to give up that dream by bullying you since we were 4 years old. You didn't. No matter how much praise I got for my quirk when we were younger, you were the one who always tried to keep up, even though I told myself you had no right to. It was because I knew deep down that you were better than me, even without a quirk. If you had been there that day, I know you would have rushed into that burning building to try and save me. You wouldn't have stood there helplessly, uselessly. I wish it hadn't taken me thinking you died to realize that. The more I pushed you around and crushed you, the more you wanted to become a hero. Bakugo looked down in shame and sincerely apologized for that. Denoa Izuku, I'm sorry. Back Katsuki, thank you. To be honest, this amnesia stuff has been really difficult for me. It's been a lot to process, trying to understand my origins, what transpired, and my place in this world, but I don't care about our past anymore. I'm just happy that I'm getting to know the current you. In addition, I understand why I would follow you. Your level of expertise with your quirk is incredible. Izuku's naivete and forgiveness made Katsuki look back up and smile a little for the first time. To be honest, I wish I could have put it in writing. You did. You devoted an entire notebook to my peculiarity. Actually, it was the first one you wrote, Katsuki said, averting his gaze. Izuku, embarrassed, rubbed the back of his head and said, are you aware of my notebooks? Izuku said sheepishly, well, that's embarrassing. Those are kind of my secret hobby. Hey, you wouldn't have thought twice about bringing it out back then, wherever you were. You've changed a lot, but you're still the same, Katsuki said thoughtfully. You would start muttering about quirks and heroes. Yeah, amnesia will do that to you, Izuku said with a little laugh. Ironically, though, it only serves to increase my appreciation for everything that is currently taking place. Almost like a new beginning, I suppose. After answering, he gazed thoughtfully up at the sky. Katsuki nodded, then his eyes regained their fire as a familiar smirk took over his face. But don't be arrogant, I'll remind you because you might not remember. I'm going to be this nation's most popular hero. The exam and the test today may have given you an advantage, but I will overtake you before you know it. Therefore, you had better stay out of my way if you can't keep up. As he spoke, Katsuki's hands popped a little. Izuku smiled before answering, recognizing the challenge in Katsuki's voice. Oh, I see, I believe you'll discover that I'm difficult to get rid of. You fucking nerd, tell me something that I'm not aware of. Melissa couldn't help but smile as she listened to the conversation behind a tree. One had found closure in their past, the other had found the friend he sorely needed, but both would find and push each other to new heights, and she had to make sure to work just as hard not to fall behind. It was the start of the second day of UA. Izuku was heading downstairs to the kitchen after getting ready and finishing his morning workout. A voice called out from behind him as he was finishing his breakfast. You're up early. Melissa, already dressed for the day, greeted him as he turned around. Izuku said, a little uneasy, oh yeah, I like to get up early and get some exercise. I could say the same for you though, Shield. She grinned as she sat down beside him. Melissa, I know the culture is different here in Japan, but I can never get used to being addressed by my surname. So, you call me Melissa and I'll call you Izuku. How does that sound? She inquired, despite the fact that it was a request. Izuku turned away, blushing a little. Silently, why yeah, that's fine by me, he answered. After giggling at the way he responded, Melissa carried on. But yeah, I'm the same with the whole waking up early thing. My training for UA these last few years had me getting up super early, so it's all just normal for me now. She clarified. As Izuku finished his breakfast, Melissa broke the brief but cozy silence between the two. So, do you want to walk together to class? She inquired. Izuku grinned. He said, I'd like that. The two carried on talking as they walked. Izuku inquired, so how do you know Katsuki? Well, I'm originally American, but I moved to Musudafu around 4 years ago to prepare for UA University. I ended up at Aldera, the same middle and high school as him. The first proper conversation I had with him, he asked me to spar. The second was when he was hitting me with a volley of explosions. She allowed a grin to form on her face while recalling the incident. Given the nature of the meeting, Izuku laughed. Yeah, I get the impression that he's that type of guy, Izuku said in a lighthearted manner. Izuku had only met Katsuki a few times to get a sense of his personality, even though he had forgotten his early years with him. He was even more of a piece of work back then, but I could tell, all he needed was a friend at the time. It took a while, but I got through to him and we've been friends ever since, she said with a smile. Izuku stumbled, so, you're not dating? He had asked what he considered a daring question, turning his face away to conceal the fact that it was growing redder. Melissa gave him a strange look and then started laughing. Me and Katsuki? No way, I never date someone who can't even call me by my name. Not to mention the constant yelling, she said casually. She gave him a direct look and grinned again. Personally, I prefer shy guys. Izuku blushed a little more before changing the subject to spare himself more humiliation. The first and only question that sprang to mind was, alright, so who's your favorite hero? Melissa said without hesitation, All Might of course. And then gave it some thought. She redirected the question to him, saying, but if I had to pick a close second, it would definitely be Mirko, followed by Yukio at number 3. Yourself? After some consideration, he said, oh, top 3. Well, if All Might is number 1 by default, I'd say Hawks is second and Edgeshot is third. Nice picks. Hawks and Edgeshot though, stark contrasts there, she said. Yeah, I like Hawks because he manages to always get to the scene and solve the problem so quickly, all while cracking jokes. He always makes dangerous hero work just look like fun. His fierce wings Quirk as well as one of the most versatile I've ever seen. As for Edgeshot, well, he's just awesome. The way how he can remain so calm and collected all the time while manipulating his body, and despite the application of his quirk and the potential implications, it's a marvel to watch. Izuku blushed again after Melissa's laughter interrupted his semi-gushing about his favorite heroes. She remarked, I can see why Katsuki calls you a hero nerd, grinning playfully. He nervously apologized, feeling a little ashamed of his tendency to analyze heroes. Oh, my bad, I started ranting, didn't I? He said. She praised him, then paused and grinned. Don't apologize, it's cool that you're so passionate about it. Your knowledge about quirks as well is super impressive. Then, as she went on, she met his eyes directly. Besides, I think it's kind of cute. Izuku was unable to stop his face from looking like a tomato this time. Melissa started laughing again. Classes resumed as usual on the second day. Class 1A began with a brief homeroom session with Aizawa, and then Smintos taught modern literature. Mathematics with ectoplasm followed modern hero art history with the R-rated hero, Midnight in the second period. The last class before lunch was English with present Mike, but the most anticipated class of the day was the one that followed lunch. The initial course on foundational hero studies. It was said that All Might himself taught it. Naturally, this was the most talked about topic during lunch break in Class 1A, where most of the students sat at the same table except for Todoroki and Koda, who had made the decision to return to the dorms for lunch. A voice came from the hallway as the class was eagerly waiting in their homeroom after lunch. Ayama, the man himself, rushed into the doorway, and the class turned. Coming through the door like a normal person. When All Might appeared in his Silver Age costume, the class was in awe. Having him rumored as the teacher was one thing. They were genuinely amazed that the rumor had come to pass. To announce the class's agenda, All Might strode to the front of the room. As you know, I will be teaching foundational hero studies for your class this year. And the theme for the first class, Issa Battle, was written on a card that All Might took out of his pocket. Combat training. The idea of letting loose with their eccentricities once more caused a buzz of excitement in the class. To go along with this training are these As All Might gestured toward the wall, a panel with cases numbered 1 through 20 appeared. These are your costumes. They have been made based on your Quirk registrations along with the requests that you sent in at the start of the year. Now, get changed and gather at ground beta. With a chorus of, "Yes sir," the class replied. Izuku quickly changed and came out wearing his hero's attire. Black combat boots were tucked into black cargo pants with a dark green circuitry design. Under his dark green jacket, which featured 2 black rings on the biceps, he wore a black t-shirt. He had a pair of dark green lined black fingerless gloves on his hands. His goggles, resting on his forehead, completed the ensemble. Simple yet multi-purpose. Along with Shoji and Tokiyami, he was among the first at ground beta with comparatively simple designs. Soon after his arrival, his fellow classmates showed up. He marveled at the range of costume designs as he looked around. Ida's and Uraraka's elaborate costumes, which featured robotic and space-themed designs, respectively. Asui, Kaminari, and Jiro's more pragmatic attire, and the garish costumes of Aoyama, Kirishima, Yaoyorozu, and Hagakure, whom he was certain was nude but was too timid to inquire, along with everything in between. Together with Todoroki, who had frozen his left side completely, leaving only a glowing red eye, Katsuki arrived in his bomber costume, complete with a black mask and 2 enormous grenade gauntlets on his forearms. Todoroki stayed at the rear of the group, and Katsuki moved to walk beside him. But it was Melissa's outfit that particularly drew his attention. She was dressed in a turquoise spandex that ran from her mid-bicep to her mid-thigh, just above the knee. She wore turquoise-lined white knee-high boots and white gauntlets with gold and turquoise lining on her forearms that also covered the back of her palms. The gold belt around her waist was shaped like the letter M, with points on both hips and in the middle. She wore her blonde hair loose, flowing past her shoulder. He turned to see Ishido grinning mischievously after feeling a nudge on his arm. She jokingly remarked, "Just making sure you weren't motionless, you were staring pretty hard." He stumbled nervously, trying to come up with an excuse. He said. Ishido just laughed at his clumsiness. When Melissa and Uraraka saw them, they approached and grinned. With a thumbs up, Uraraka exclaimed, "Looking good guys." Izuku laughed and Katsuki sneered, but All Might interrupted to call their attention. "Very nice young men and ladies. From now on you are heroes. Wear those costumes with pride as they represent WHOUR. Now shall we begin, you zygotes?" Ida held up his hand and said something. "Teacher, since this is a battle center that we encountered in the entrance exam, will we be conducting urban battles again?" He inquired. "Good question, but no. While yes, the majority of villain combat is outside, the most dangerous villains appear indoors. The numbers back this up. Situations such as hostages and backroom deals, these are the situations that truly intelligent villains conjure in this society full of heroes. Today we will be conducting indoor anti-personnel training." With a worried tilt of her head, Asui held up her hand. "We'll be doing this without basic training. Ribbit," she said. "The best experience comes from real battle. However, this time, it is not just disposable robots that are simply destroyed." The question from Yaoyorozu was interrupted by, "How will wins and losses be determined?" Katsuki's question, "Can I destroy them anyways?" sounded more like a threat than a query. Uraraka inquired anxiously, "Are you going to threaten to expel us like Mr. Aizawa?" Ida asked eagerly, "How will the teams be decided?" Aoyama interrupted, swishing his cape to create a shimmering effect, "Isn't my cape amazing?" All Might began to perspire uneasily. "I'll answer all of those questions, just give me a moment." All Might took out a notebook and began reading the lesson plan. The situation is a bomb threat. The bomb will be hidden somewhere in the building. The heroes must catch the villains or secure the weapon in the allotted time. The villains must protect the bomb for the entire time or catch the heroes. We will decide the teams by drawing lots. Ida was taken aback by this approach. "We'll be selecting teams in a random and haphazard manner," he stammered, bewildered. "It makes sense," Izuku mentioned with consideration. Everyone in the class looked at him. In the field, professional heroes frequently have to collaborate with heroes from other agencies in improvised teams. "That's exactly what this simulates," Izuku explained. "I see. What amazing foresight. I apologize for my rudeness, sir." Ida apologized and bowed to a 90-degree angle. "No problem. Let's get started immediately." The teams listed below were selected. Shield and Midoriya on Team A. Team B. Todoroki and Shoji. Yaoyorozu and Mineta on Team C. Bakugo and Uraraka on Team D. Ashido and Aoyama on Team E. Team F. Sato and Koda. Team G. Jiro and Kaminari. Team H. Asui and Tokiyami. Ida and Hagakure on Team I. Kirishima and Siro on Team J. Melissa gave Izuku a smile as she glanced at him. It appears that we are together. She said, let's try our best. Why yeah, he replied with a trembling smile. After forming their teams, the students returned their focus to All Might, who was going to reveal which teams would play one another. Team A, the heroes, and Team D, the villains, will be the first teams to engage in combat. Villain team, get in first and get ready. The battle will start 5 minutes after the hero team is allowed to enter. Follow me to the observation room, the rest of you. As Katsuki and Uraraka prepared to enter the building, All Might spoke to them. Young Bakugo and young Uraraka, in order to get the most out of this exercise, you need to think like villains. Go all out and don't be scared to get hurt, but if things get out of control, I'll end the match. Yes, sir, Katsuki merely sneered, but Uraraka gave a sincere response. Uraraka entered the building, went to the bomb, and just stood there, staring. So, this is what we're supposed to safeguard, she said absently. They definitely got the whole nuclear warhead aesthetic perfectly. She repeatedly tapped the bomb with her knuckles. Given the range of machines he can construct, Midoriya appears to be the more dangerous of the two. Hoo-ha, it's papier ma sent cha copyright a what Todoa Melissa is fairly strong, but her control over her quirk seems shaky. Bakugo, what do you think we should do? She turned to face Katsuki, who had been standing silently facing the doorway, as she posed the query. Round face, don't you make things float? It appeared that Katsuki had disregarded her earlier remarks and inquiry, choosing instead to pose his own query. A round face, Uraraka clarified, choosing not to argue with Katsuki over her assigned nickname. That's not my never mind. Yes, I can. I get sick if I exceed a weight limit, but that shouldn't be much of an issue here. You protect the bomb by remaining here. Keep it out of Blondie's grasp. He said, I'll take care of the nerd, and then he moved to the doorway. All right, but I can assist. I only need to make contact with Midoriya to render him immobile. Melissa won't have a chance against either of us once we take him out because he's pretty strong, she thought. Stop being foolish, round face. The nerd has good airborne mobility. Nothing will stand between him and the bomb if you do that. Uraraka agreed, albeit glumly, and stayed silent. Besides, we're cramped inside, you'll just get in the way of my quirk, he said in a final tone. He turned to Uraraka on his way to the door, and as he gave him one last warning, his eyes narrowed. And one more thing, round face, don't underestimate Blondie. He left the room after saying that. Izuku and Melissa were preparing to approach outside the building's entrance. According to what I observed during the quirk apprehension test, Katsuki can produce explosions with his hands, while Uraraka can negate gravity and make objects float simply by touching them. They're both very useful quirks in a close-quarters setting, Izuku remarked reflectively. Melissa listened intently as he put a hand on his chin and hesitated before continuing. Although Uraraka cannot be undervalued, Katsuki's fighting skills are probably the greatest danger. It would be ideal for us to meet them one-on-one. Additionally, I believe this to be the most likely outcome, he said. How can you be so certain that they will part ways? She asked. Well, their greatest strength is close quarters, but it has also made them their greatest weakness. Particularly in such a small space, Uraraka is unlikely to be able to approach while Katsuki is attacking, or he will take the chance of striking her. Someone like Katsuki would undoubtedly recognize this. It's up to you to get to and seize the bomb, but our best chance would be for me to try to take him on myself. He stated resolutely, I hate to have to put so much pressure on you, but whether or not you can defeat Uraraka will determine whether or not we win. No issue. With equal resolve, she answered, you can consider it done. They were both facing the structure. Izuku, by the way, remember that I also want to be number one. Watch yourself, because I'm going to keep working until I surpass both of you, she said with a strong sense of conviction, even though you and Katsuki are currently ahead of me. Through the speakers came the voice of All Might. Start the indoor battle training exercise, Team A and Team D. Izuku smiled and turned to face her with a hint of admiration. You've got it. Let's go get that win now, he said. All right, she nodded in response. Izuku and Melissa went into the assigned building, and because of time constraints, they had to move fast when there was clear sight, like in straight hallways, but they would pause to cautiously peek around corners. They had made it through 3 floors of the 12-story building without coming across Katsuki or Uraraka. He waved away the smoke and stood there silently with a dangerous glint in his eyes, but just as they were halfway through the 4th floor, Izuku heard a small pop and his instincts took over, grabbing Melissa and diving backwards as Katsuki emerged from a side room and let off a powerful explosion that barely missed the 2 of them. Izuku and Melissa leapt to their feet, looked at one another, and Izuku nodded to Melissa to move past Katsuki and continue looking for the bomb, but she was stopped in her tracks when an explosion exploded in front of her. Katsuki gave her a fierce look. "You didn't anticipate that I would simply let you get by with ease, did you?" he growled. Out of the corner of his eye, a giant hand reached out to him, and he blasted himself into the air to dodge it, only to see Izuku standing there, his left smack hand formed. "Hey, Melissa, hurry!" Izuku yelled as he ducked under another explosion and swung wildly at Katsuki once more, missing, but diverting her attention long enough to allow her to get away. Melissa disappeared, leaving the 2 boys to fight as she ran down the hallway and up another set of stairs. Katsuki grinned viciously at Izuku. "All right, nerd, get ready to be dismantled," he shouted. Izuku completed the pair and smiled back, forming his right smack hand in response. "Go for it," Izuku cried out. Izuku tried to time a counterattack by throwing a right hook when Katsuki approached, but Katsuki launched himself at him without hesitation. However, it was ineffective, and Izuku was only able to watch as his fist struck the wall while Katsuki executed a quick move, flipping over Izuku's head and unleashing 2 vicious explosions from above. Katsuki was about to land behind Izuku and resume the attack, but Izuku was able to quickly turn around and swing his left smack hand around, pinning Katsuki against the wall. However, he made the crucial error of leaving Katsuki's palms free, and just as he was about to submit him, a huge explosion erupted, blowing a large chunk out of his smack hand and sending him reeling back in agony. They glared at one another as they faced one another at opposite ends of the hallway. Katsuki's face abruptly changed to another smile. Hey nerd, let me remind you of something you might have forgotten. My peculiarity is that when I explode, I release sweat that resembles nitroglycerin from my palm sweat glands, which I can light to cause explosions, he explained. Before continuing, Katsuki lifted his right arm to show off a pin on his gauntlet. If they're designed correctly, these gauntlets will store the sweat inside of Tama. As Katsuki primed the gauntlet and put a finger on the pin, Izuku realized the implications instantly. All Might's voice echoed through their earpieces as it charged. "Stop, young Bakugo, are you attempting to murder him? He won't die if I don't strike him in the face." Katsuki answered right away. Katsuki then yanked the gauntlet's pin, causing a huge explosion that shook the building's foundations, launching Izuku into the adjacent room and creating a huge hole in the building's side. Katsuki emerged through the smoke cloud, his left gauntlet glowing red, a mad expression on his face, and Izuku had barely managed to get his smack hands up in time, but they were badly damaged with multiple holes, and his jacket was badly charred, pieces of burnt metal beginning to crumble to the ground before the smack hands disassembled completely. "Awaken, nerd, why should I take it easy on you when the villains won't?" As he stalked in Izuku's direction, Katsuki spoke in a tone that was a mix of snarling and laughter. As All Might spoke again through the earpieces, Izuku clenched his teeth and braced himself for battle. "Young Bakugo, the fight will end and your team will win if you use that again. It is foolish for both heroes and villains to invite destruction to the region they are attempting to defend." Katsuki snarled at the restrictions placed on him. "All right, who requires a piece of support? My fists are sufficient," he screamed in exasperation. The fight was turning into a mauling, and Katsuki launched himself off the mark again. Izuku built a VB, trying to launch a kick with his right foot, but Katsuki used his explosions to strafe to Izuku's side and delivered an explosion to his ribcage. Katsuki then grabbed Izuku's left arm and used his free hand to launch an explosion that increased his momentum, enabling him to throw Izuku to the ground. Unrelenting as Izuku was down, he released another large explosion, blowing Izuku to the end of the room. Izuku's vision was beginning to blur as he stumbled to his feet, touching the back of his head cautiously and grimacing as a little blood was on his hand. The situation was dire. He was nearing his breaking point. Katsuki was not only very skilled at close combat, but he hadn't factored in the extreme mobility he could exercise in such a small space, and when combined with the pure destructive power of his quirk, Izuku was having trouble imagining a situation in which he would prevail. At this point, it seemed inevitable that Katsuki would defeat him. Perhaps he could just stall long enough. No, he couldn't abandon Melissa in a possible 2v1 situation. He trusted her to fulfill her end of the bargain, so he had to do his share, and he would defeat Katsuki right then and there. Izuku stumbled. "You know Katsukiya," the first words. He lowered his goggles and straightened up. "It's not just you who is full of surprises." With conviction, he yelled. Izuku activated his slam cannon, dug a patch of concrete from the broken wall behind him, and fired. Katsuki deflected the projectile with an explosion, but the distraction worked because Izuku had already moved to the ride and used it to close the area almost immediately. He disassembled the ride and tackled Katsuki, and the two fell to the ground in a heap. Katsuki was priming an explosion from his left, so Izuku shifted and straightened his arm to create a misfire, then flipped Katsuki by the arm and used all of his strength to slam him on his back. Izuku shifted to the boogie pack and took off, launching the turbines at the wall, causing a small explosion around Katsuki that obscured his vision. Izuku quickly formed the right smack hand and swung, causing Katsuki, who was still disoriented when he got up, to only raise his arms to block, and the smack hand crashed into him, shattering his gauntlets and sending him flying into the wall. Izuku disassembled the boogie pack and used the momentum to fly through the air, build the right smack hand again, and slam it into Katsuki's body, pinning him to the ground, this time with his arms pinned to his side, palms facing his body. With a yell, Izuku lifted the smack hand that had contained Katsuki and slammed him into the ground again, causing the floor to crack with the force, rendering Katsuki unconscious. The fight barely won. Izuku collapsed and lay back, his smack hand disassembling and his eyesight beginning to darken, when he heard All Might's voice coming through the speakers. Before the whole building trembled, Melissa heard All Might's frantic yell in the earpiece. What were those two doing? When she reached the 6th floor, she was met with a spacious room with Uraraka standing in the center and small items like crates and loose debris floating around her. Melissa searched the room for the bomb and found it floating by the ceiling in the far corner. She chose to attack Uraraka from the front, and in response, he picked up a big rectangular crate that she had made weightless and swung it at some of the rubble. "I'm sorry, Melissa, but my comet home run is going to knock you down." Uraraka began her attack with an almost naive smile. In order to avoid the makeshift missiles, Melissa had to quickly duck behind a pillar as the debris flew in her direction. Melissa then charged one for all into both of her little fingers, emerging from behind the pillar and letting off both of them, sending two shockwaves that caused Uraraka to dive sideways as her ammunition was strewn everywhere. She had kept the output relatively low, so her fingers were a little bruised but not broken, but they still hurt. She ignored the pain and ran toward the bomb when she caught a glimpse of a big rock hurtling toward her from the corner of her eye. Thinking quickly, she charged one for all into her right ring finger and did her best to limit the output, but her lack of concentration time meant that her control was still lacking, and even though she was able to destroy the rock as planned, she had to sacrifice her ring finger in the process. Uraraka appeared behind her before she could think about this. Melissa squirmed as the weightless sensation overtook her and she floated helplessly in the air. Melissa attempted to pivot and fire off another shockwave, but she was unable to fully charge one for all before Uraraka placed a palm on her, instantly rendering her weightless. Uraraka grinned as she dug through her pocket for the capture tape, breathing a sigh of relief at her triumph. "Melissa, that was enjoyable. I apologize, but it's over now," she said with a smile. Melissa remained silent out of frustration because she had failed Izuku, who was depending on her, despite her assurance that she would win this. Melissa was staring at the floating bomb when Uraraka reached out to wrap the tape around her when she suddenly had an idea. She would have to adopt Katsuki's method. Melissa flicked, extending her arms backwards and channeling one for all into her middle fingers, creating a current of wind that pushed her toward the bomb. Uraraka was momentarily startled as the wind knocked her back, and she attempted to react by making herself weightless and jumping after Melissa, but she was too far ahead. Melissa repeated the process with her index fingers this time, and this time she was able to launch herself close enough to reach out to the bomb, placing both hands on it and hearing All Might's voice. "The bomb is safe now. The hero team wins." Melissa and the bomb fell to the ground without incident as Uraraka let go of her quirk. "Wow, Melissa, that was some quick thinking. I thought I had one. Nice moves." She gave a compliment. Melissa returned the smile. "You nearly got me. You're so creative with your quirk. You weren't kidding when you sent me those attacks." Melissa returned the praise. You deserve the same from me. In fact, we've already come up with a few moves for when we collaborate. I can actually help you take off. Uraraka responded, laughing at the idea of joining forces with her friend to execute special moves. As they spoke, the two began to leave the room and head down the stairs. Yes, that does sound like a strategy. Despite the fact that I need to better manage my quirk, Melissa remarked, her tone changing from casual to thoughtful. Yes, but how are your fingers doing? Uraraka inquired with a tinge of worry. They're all right. I just lost focus once, but Recovery Girl can take care of that. Oh my god. When they arrived at the 4th floor and both of them gasped at the carnage they saw, their conversation was cut off. Izuku and Katsuki were lying on the floor, apparently unconscious, while small robots placed them on stretchers and prepared to take them to Recovery Girl's office. The entire floor was in ruins, and the damage was so severe that they could see out of the building through the huge hole in the wall. When the two girls hurried over to them in concern, they appeared to be in poor condition. Their costumes were ruined, Izuku had several burns and was bleeding, and Katsuki was not doing much better, with an unsightly bruise forming on the side of his face. Izuku, Katsuki, are you all right? Desperately, Melissa asked. Instead of them, a tiny robot turned to face her and answered. They have normal vitals. They are overworked and hurt. Our standard procedure is to take them right away to Recovery Girl. According to preliminary diagnostics, following treatment, they will return to their ideal state. The robot droned, please let us pass so we can treat them as soon as possible. Before returning to the observation room and being welcomed by their class, the two girls shifted to the side and watched anxiously as the robots carried Izuku and Katsuki away, looking at each other anxiously. You guys were crazy. With a broad smile on his face, Kirishima exclaimed. You flew, Melissa, nice moves. With excitement, Ashido cried out. Are Midoriya and Bakugo okay? They were fighting, Shiro inquired. With a clap of his hands, All Might spoke. All right, class, let's now review that battle and determine who was the match's MVP. Speaking, Yaoyorozu held up her hand. Clearly, it was Shield, sir. Bakugo and Midoriya were both too worried about getting into their own personal conflict that would leave them both crippled and with severe injuries. Uraraka's lack of seriousness made him too reluctant to capture Shield. In addition, instead of trying to follow Shield, she ought to have let go of her quirk to break her momentum. Shield, on the other hand, stayed focused on the assignment and, even though Uraraka was superior to her in battle, she was still able to give her team a victory by using quick thinking, she explained in detail. Why yes of course thank you young Yaoyorozu. Such a thorough analysis surprised All Might, but he soon collected himself and went on. Now, I will draw the teams for the next battle but try not to cause as much damage as the first. All Might turned to the class to conclude the lesson after the battle trials were over and every team had taken part. Class, well done today. Awesome work was done by everyone for your first class. During your homeroom period tomorrow, Mr. Aizawa will evaluate your performance. Then I have to be on my way. Return to your dorms and change. Then, with a blast of wind behind him, All Might ran away. I think All Might is awesome. The rest of them agreed with Kaminari's comment. Sato said, somewhat disappointed, it's a shame he had to leave in such a rush though. Yes, but since he's All Might, he will undoubtedly be busy. Kirishima replied. Following that, the students changed and headed back to Heights Alliance Dorm A. About 2 hours after classes ended, as they were winding down for the day and relaxing, Izuku and Katsuki entered through the doors. One was grinning, the other was frowning, both still sporting a few plasters, but they looked fine overall, and their class enthusiastically greeted them, bombarding them with questions and remarks. How are you all doing? It was a very manly fight. Kirishima gave a shout of excitement. You guys are already in the hospital on the second day. Couldn't you wait until the first week was over? Dryly, Kaminari said. You guys were acting like you were trying to kill each other during that crazy fight. Mineta said. Melissa, who stood at the rear of the group, grinned as they passed. I hope both of you are doing well, she said to them as they stood in front of her. After class, I stopped by Recovery Girl's office to have my fingers bandaged, but she wouldn't let me see you. Izuku smiled back, blushed a little, and raised his hand. Thank you. Katsuki, Melissa, and I were just caught up in the moment, but we're all set to go now. He said. TCH, you should worry about yourself, Blondie, Bakugo said with a dismissive sneer as he walked past and made his way to his room. Before turning to face one another, they both smiled at him as he vanished up the stairs. Wait, did you lose control of your quirk? You mentioned that you had to visit Recovery Girl. Are you okay now? Izuku's voice was a little worried as he asked. Melissa laughed when he expressed concern. Yes, only one finger was severely injured. However, I think I'm beginning to understand how to use my quirk. With a determined expression on her face, she stated, it's definitely getting easier to control. Izuku nodded and grinned with relief. I'm glad to hear that. And I'm right here if you need any guidance or assistance, he said. Melissa gave him a big smile, but then they noticed a cough, and Ashido stood to the side, grinning mischievously once more. You too, is there something I'm missing? With slyness, she inquired. Melissa blushed lightly as she laughed, and Izuku blushed at the implications and had to turn his head completely as he stammered nervously and incoherently. The second day at UA had been quite eventful.
So this was it for the series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, bye bye.